The day started like any other hiking trip. I had planned this one for weeks, picking out a trail deep in the mountains that promised solitude and a chance to get away from everything. The weather was perfect, clear skies with a gentle breeze, the kind that feels like it's just right for a long walk. I woke up early, packed my backpack carefully with all the essentials. Water, snacks, first aid kit, a map, compass, extra layers, and my trusty flashlight even though I hoped I wouldn't need it. I made sure my phone was fully charged, though I knew the signal would likely be spotty once I got further into the forest. The drive to the trailhead was long but peaceful. As I pulled up to the small gravel parking area, I was the only car there. A good sign for solitude, though maybe not for safety. I double-checked my pack, tightened the straps, and started down the trail. The air smelled fresh, a mix of pine and damp earth from a recent rain. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush, and the steady crunch of my boots on the dirt path. The trail started easy enough, a gentle uphill with a few switchbacks. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. I stopped a few times to take pictures, close-ups of wildflowers, wide shots of the valley below, and the towering trees that seemed to reach for the sky. I felt good, strong. This was what I had wanted. A day alone in the wild, away from noise and people. About 2 hours in, the trail began to change. The path narrowed, and the trees grew closer together, their branches forming a thicker roof overhead. The light dimmed, and the air grew cooler. I noticed the silence more. Fewer birds, less wind. It felt almost too quiet. I shrugged it off, telling myself the forest had its rhythms. Maybe it was just the time of day. Then I spotted something on the trail ahead, a broken branch lying awkwardly across the path. Nothing unusual by itself, but as I got closer, I saw fresh footprints in the dirt around it. Large prints, too big to be from any animal I knew. I studied them carefully. They weren't human either, not quite. The shape was strange, almost like a mix between a boot and a claw. I felt a chill despite the warm weather. I took a deep breath and kept walking, telling myself it was probably just some hunter or another hiker with weird boots. But I was alone out here, and the map showed no signs of any campsites or hunting areas nearby. Still, I pressed on, telling myself I wasn't afraid. I had been hiking these woods for years. I knew how to handle the unexpected. About an hour later, the trail became steeper, rocky. I had to use my hands to scramble up some sections. The forest thinned out a bit, and I could see more of the mountain slopes. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, whipping through the trees and making a low, haunting whistle. I stopped at a small clearing to catch my breath and drink some water. It was then I realized I had lost the trail. The narrow path I had been following suddenly disappeared into a tangle of bushes and fallen logs. I looked around, trying to spot the trail markers I had seen earlier. Nothing. The forest around me looked almost identical in every direction. Thick trunks, moss-covered rocks, a carpet of dead leaves. I pulled out my map and compass, trying to figure out where I was. The map showed the main trail running north-south, but I wasn't sure which way I had come from. My compass needle spun erratically. My phone showed no signal. I started to feel that growing sense of unease you get when you realize you might be truly lost. I decided to backtrack to the last spot I was sure of the trail. But as I turned, I heard something. A soft crack, like a twig snapping. I froze. The forest was quiet again, but that noise had been close. I waited, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was probably a squirrel or a bird. I moved slowly, scanning the undergrowth. My heart pounded harder than it should. The sun was already starting to dip behind the trees, casting longer shadows that stretched and warped the shapes around me. Every rustle, every shifting leaf, set me on edge. Then I heard it again. Crack, crack, but this time closer, coming from my left. I swung my head quickly, searching for the source, but saw nothing. No animals, no movement, only the forest holding its breath. I tightened my grip on my hiking pole and started to walk faster, trying to find any sign of the trail. Suddenly, I saw something moving between two trees ahead, a quick flicker of dark against the green and brown. My breath caught, I stopped, trying to focus. Whatever it wasn't like any animal I had ever seen in these woods. It was too big and it moved too quietly for its size. I debated whether to call out, but I knew there was no one to hear me. I debated running, but running in unknown terrain with the sun setting was dangerous. I felt trapped in a moment of sharp tension, caught between curiosity and fear. I decided to back away slowly, keeping my eyes on the spot where I had seen the movement. I tried to stay calm and think. If I could just get back to the main trail, I could make my way down before dark. But the forest seemed to close in tighter around me. The sounds of wildlife had vanished completely. Even the wind had stopped. The silence was thick, oppressive. I felt exposed and vulnerable. Then, without warning, I heard a low growl. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Deep, guttural, and full of menace. My heart leapt into my throat. I spun around, gripping my pole like a weapon. The growling came again, from behind me. I didn't see anything, but I knew something was there. Something big. Something dangerous. I forced myself to move quickly but quietly, stepping carefully over roots and rocks. I scanned constantly, the fear making my senses sharper. The sun was almost gone now, and the forest was plunged into dim twilight. I thought about how unprepared I was for this. I had no real defense except my pole and my own will to survive. I swallowed the lump in my throat and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Then I heard it. A heavy, thudding step right behind me. Closer now. I didn't dare turn. I just ran, stumbling over roots and branches, heart pounding so loud I was sure it echoed in the quiet woods. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook. I didn't stop until I saw the faint glimmer of the trail markers again, illuminated by the last light of day. I threw myself onto the path and didn't look back. I kept moving downhill, faster now, adrenaline pushing me forward despite exhaustion. The forest gradually opened up, and soon I could see the parking area lights in the distance. When I finally reached my car, I collapsed into the driver's seat, shaking. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. I don't know what exactly I saw or heard out there. Maybe it was a wild animal I didn't recognize, or maybe something else. But I never went back to that trail, and I never hiked alone again. I had planned this trip for months. It was supposed to be a simple solo hike, a chance to clear my head and be alone with nature for a few days. I picked a well-known trail in a remote mountain area that I'd heard was beautiful but challenging. It was early autumn, and the leaves were just starting to turn orange and yellow. The air had that crisp feeling, like it was already hinting at winter but not quite there yet. The sky was a clear blue as I pulled my pack tighter and stepped onto the trail early one morning. The first few hours were easy. The trail was well marked, winding through dense forest with tall pine and maple trees all around. I felt good. I was light on my feet, my boots making soft thuds against the dirt path. I stopped a few times to take pictures of the bright leaves, the way the sunlight spilled through the branches, painting patterns on the ground. I could smell the fresh earth and the faint scent of pine needles crushed underfoot. After about 4 hours, I reached a clearing that looked out over a valley below. The view was incredible. Rolling hills covered in trees, with a river cutting through the middle like a silver ribbon. I sat on a large rock, pulled out my water bottle, and took a long drink. My legs were tired but not sore. I checked my map and GPS. I was exactly where I thought I'd be. The plan was to continue another few miles to a small ridge where I'd camp for the night. I packed up and moved on. The trail started to get steeper and rockier as I climbed higher. The trees grew thinner, and the wind picked up. It was cooler now, and I zipped my jacket a little tighter. I was enjoying the challenge. The sound of my boots crunching on loose stones filled the quiet. Occasionally, I heard a bird call or the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. About an hour before sunset, I reached the ridge. The wind was sharp and cold at the top. I found a flat spot just off the trail where I could set up my tent. The ground was covered with dry pine needles and small stones. I gathered some dry wood for a fire and started to pitch my tent. The sky was changing colors, pink and orange fading into dark blue. I knew I'd need to eat soon and get some rest. I cooked a simple meal of dehydrated pasta and drank some hot tea from my thermos. I sat quietly, watching the last light disappear behind the mountains. The valley below was swallowed in shadows. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the occasional whistle of the wind. I crawled into my sleeping bag as darkness fully took over. My headlamp was ready on my forehead, and my knife was close. I felt calm but alert. This was what I had come for: peace, solitude, and a break from the noise of everyday life. Around midnight, I woke suddenly. The wind outside had changed. It wasn't just a breeze anymore. It was a strong, gusting wind that rattled the tent poles and made the canvas flap loudly. I lay still for a moment, listening. Something else was there too. A faint sound, like footsteps on rocks. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a mountain goat moving near the ridge. But then the sound stopped. The silence that followed was heavier, more intense. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, shining it toward the tent flap. The light caught the shadows of trees bending in the wind, but I saw no movement. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind playing tricks. I turned off the light and tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. The noise had put me on edge. Every few minutes, I thought I heard a twig snap or a faint rustle outside. I felt trapped in the small space of the tent. I kept thinking about the stories of hikers getting lost or hurt in these mountains. How a simple wrong step could mean falling down a cliff or breaking an ankle miles from help. Suddenly, there was a loud crash nearby. It was like a tree branch breaking or a heavy rock tumbling down the slope. The tent shook again, and I scrambled out with my flashlight. The wind was whipping around me, and the fire was almost out. I grabbed my jacket and peered into the dark. Nothing was visible except the shadows of the trees and the rocky ground. The air smelled wet and cold. I decided to put out the fire completely. It was too dangerous in the wind, and went back inside the tent, locking the zipper tight. I lay awake for hours, listening. I thought I heard voices far off in the distance, but maybe that was just my imagination. I told myself it was better to stay calm and wait for morning. When dawn finally came, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. I unzipped the tent and looked around. The wind had knocked down some branches, and the ground was wet with dew and rain from the night. I packed up quickly, feeling uneasy. I decided to take a different route down, one that was supposed to be shorter but steeper. The trail was muddy, and I slipped a few times on the wet rocks. I was tense and tired, constantly glancing around, half expecting something to appear. The forest felt different, darker, more closed in. The trees were thicker here, and the canopy blocked most of the light. After a while, I realized I didn't recognize the trail anymore. The markers were fewer and harder to see, and the path seemed to fork in strange ways. I stopped and pulled out my GPS, but the signal was weak. My heart started pounding. I was lost. I tried to backtrack but ended up walking in circles. The forest seemed endless. I checked my map again and again, but nothing matched what I saw. The sun was hidden behind clouds, making it harder to find my way. I felt panic rising. My water was running low. I had some snacks left, but not enough for a long stay. I knew I needed to keep moving or risk being stuck here overnight with no shelter. I pushed forward, trying to stay calm. I looked for any signs of the main trail, broken branches, footprints, anything. But the forest was quiet except for the occasional bird and the rustling of leaves. My footsteps were muffled by moss and wet soil. At one point, I climbed a steep hill to try to get a better view. From the top, I could see treetops stretching in every direction with no clear signs of the trail. My phone battery was almost dead. I realized I should have told someone exactly where I was going. The day dragged on, and the forest grew darker as the clouds thickened. The temperature dropped, and I shivered despite my jacket. The wind started to pick up again, blowing cold and wet through the trees. I felt exhausted and scared. I tried to keep my thoughts steady. I knew people got lost and found their way back. I reminded myself to stay calm, conserve energy, and look for water. Then, as I was walking along a narrow slope, I heard a sudden noise, a low growl. I froze. The sound came from behind some bushes. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was a wild animal, probably a bear or a mountain lion. I remembered the safety tips. Make yourself big, don't run, make noise. I slowly backed away, keeping my eyes on the bushes. The growling stopped. I waited for a long moment but saw no movement. I thought maybe the animal moved on. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to keep going. Hours later, as night fell again, I found a shallow cave under some rocks. It was damp and cold, but better than nothing. I made a small fire with some dry twigs I had gathered and huddled close to it. I tried to stay awake and alert, but my body was worn out. That night was the worst. The wind howled around the rocks, and I thought I heard footsteps and strange sounds again. I didn't dare go outside. I kept my knife close and my flashlight on. The next morning, I decided to try to climb back up the slope to see if I could find a familiar landmark. I was weak and hungry but had to keep moving. After climbing for what felt like hours, I saw a narrow river below, the same one I had seen from the ridge on day one. Relief flooded me. I followed the river downstream, hoping it would lead me to a road or a ranger station. The banks were steep and slippery. I slipped once and nearly fell into the water, but caught myself. After a long walk, I finally heard the sound of voices. I shouted and waved my arms. A group of hikers appeared, startled but helpful. They gave me water and food and called for help on their radio. I was rescued later that afternoon. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to serious danger. The mountains were beautiful but unforgiving. I hadn't been prepared for getting lost or for the sudden weather changes. I'd taken for granted how quickly things could go wrong. That hike taught me a hard lesson. Nature demands respect and preparation. The silence and solitude I had sought almost turned into something much darker. I'm grateful to be alive, and I know I'll never take a solo hike lightly again. I never thought a simple hiking trip could turn into the hardest, most terrifying experience of my life. I had planned everything carefully, or so I thought. I was alone, which was normal for me. I liked the quiet and the solitude. The woods gave me peace, a break from the noise and rush of the city. But that day, something changed. The calm vanished, replaced by an overwhelming feeling of danger that grew step by step as I moved deeper into the forest. I started early in the morning, around 7 a.m., when the air was still cool and fresh. The sun was just beginning to peek through the tall trees, sending long, thin beams of light that made everything shimmer in a soft glow. The trail was well marked at first, clear dirt path bordered by bushes and wildflowers. Birds sang above, and I could hear the faint rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. It was the kind of morning that made me feel alive, connected to the earth. I carried my usual gear, a sturdy backpack with water, snacks, a first aid kit, a map, a compass, and my phone. The signal was weak but usable near the start of the trail. I had planned to hike to a small lake about 10 miles in, a spot I'd never visited but heard was beautiful and peaceful. The weather was perfect, not too hot, no sign of rain. I was ready for a long day of walking and exploring. The trail soon started to narrow, and the trees grew thicker. The sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor, and the air felt cooler. I was alone, but it didn't bother me. I was used to that. The forest felt like an old friend, familiar and safe. As I walked, I noticed the sounds of the city had disappeared entirely.
No planes o overhead, no cars, no distant voices.
Just the wind in the trees and the soft crunch of my boots on the leaves. About 3 miles in, the trail forked. According to my map, I was supposed to take the left path, which would lead me closer to the lake. But the left path looked less used, more overgrown. The right path looked clearer, wider, almost like a road, but it didn't match the map's direction. I hesitated but decided to trust the map and took the left path. That's when things started to feel off. The trail became harder to follow. Branches scraped my arms and legs, and the ground was uneven, filled with roots and loose rocks. The forest seemed quieter now. The birds had stopped singing. I checked my phone for the GPS, but the signal was gone. I wasn't too worried. I had my compass and map, but still, a knot of unease grew inside me. After about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen any trail markers. The path seemed to be disappearing, swallowed up by the undergrowth. I stopped and looked around, trying to find any sign of where to go next. The trees all looked the same, tall and gray with thick bark, their branches tangled high above. I pulled out the map again and tried to orient myself using the compass. I was supposed to head northwest, but the path I was on seemed to turn northeast. I considered backtracking, but the idea of going back the way I came felt discouraging after the rough walk. I pressed on, hoping to find a clearer trail soon. The forest floor grew wetter. I stepped carefully around puddles and muddy patches. The air smelled damp and earthy, and the sky was now hidden completely by thick branches. The light had dimmed, even though it was still early afternoon. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that I had been in tough spots before. Suddenly, I heard a crack behind me. I froze. The sound was soft but sharp, like a branch snapping under a heavy foot. I turned quickly, scanning the trees, but I saw nothing. No animals, no other hikers, just empty woods. My heart started to race. Maybe it was just a deer or a bird landing on a branch. I shook my head to clear the fear and kept walking. Minutes later, the sound came again, this time closer and more deliberate. It was the same cracking, but not like an animal moving. It felt like someone or something was stepping carefully through the forest, breaking twigs. My pace quickened. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was the wind or an animal, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I was alone and someone else was nearby. I reached for my phone again, hoping for signal. Nothing. The battery was also getting low. I wished I had brought a power bank, but I never thought I'd need one. My first aid kit felt useless if I got hurt out here. My map and compass were all I had. I looked around, trying to find a place to hide or climb, but the forest was thick and tall. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself. Panic started to rise. I kept walking, faster now, trying to find any sign of the lake or a way out. Then I heard voices. Not loud, just whispers, but definitely human. I stopped and held my breath, trying to listen. The voices were coming from the right, the direction I had chosen not to go at the fork earlier. I debated whether to head toward them or away. If they were friendly hikers, I wanted to find them. But if they were trouble, I needed to avoid them. I took a deep breath and decided to move away, deeper into the forest, hoping to find the lake. But the trees grew denser, the ground more slippery. I slipped on mossy rocks and nearly fell into a shallow creek. By late afternoon, the light was fading fast. The forest was darker now, shadows thick and moving. I knew I should set up a camp, but I was afraid to stop moving. I had a small flashlight, but the batteries were old and weak. My water was almost gone. My snacks were packed away, but I was too anxious to eat. Then I realized the worst. I was lost. I had no idea where I was. My compass told me the direction, but the forest offered no clear path. I started marking trees with my knife, hoping to find my way back, but every tree looked the same. Every direction felt wrong. Night came. The forest was silent, the wind a low whisper. I found a small clearing and sat down, pulling my jacket tight. I tried to stay calm, telling myself to rest for a while and then try to find the trail again. Suddenly, footsteps, not the soft cracking from before, but heavier, slower. I held my breath, watching the edge of the clearing. A shadow moved. I got up quickly and started walking, keeping low, trying to move quietly. The footsteps followed, always just behind me. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would give me away. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran blindly through the forest, crashing through branches and roots, the uneven ground cutting into my ankles through my boots. My legs screamed from the effort, but fear kept me moving. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a dirt road. I collapsed there, gasping for air. My phone buzzed. It had signal again. I called 911 and gave my location as best as I could. A search team arrived within an hour and found me. They said the forest was known for illegal hunting camps, and sometimes people moved through the woods without permission. They told me the footsteps were likely hunters or trespassers, and they often made noise to scare people off. I was lucky. I never went back to that forest. The fear stayed with me, the memory of running through the dark, the sound of footsteps behind me, and the helplessness of being lost with no one to call. But I learned something important that day. The woods are beautiful, but they can be dangerous in ways you don't expect. Trust your instincts. Prepare better than you think you need to. And when the forest turns dark, sometimes the scariest thing is not what's in your mind, but what's really there, just beyond the trees. I had been planning this hike for months. The trail was known but rarely traveled, a long stretch of wilderness tucked far away from the usual crowded paths. It was a trail I found mentioned once in a dusty old hiking guide at the library, something that caught my eye because of how remote and untouched it sounded. Promised solitude, rough terrain, and the kind of quiet that city life never gave. I needed that quiet. I needed to escape. I packed my bag with the usual essentials: water, some food, a basic first aid kit, a map, compass, extra clothing, and my trusty flashlight. No phone signal was expected out there, but I took it anyway, mostly out of habit. I left early, before the sun was fully up. The air was cold, sharp and fresh as I started the trail. The path was narrow, overgrown in places with bushes and low-hanging branches. The forest was thick, mostly pine and fir trees, their needles forming a soft carpet underfoot. I breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. The smell of pine mixed with earth and something wet, morning dew or the aftermath of a rain the night before. For the first several hours, the hike was peaceful. The sounds were mostly natural. Birds chirping, the distant rustle of squirrels or small animals in the underbrush. Every so often, a breeze whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of moss and damp wood. I kept a steady pace, careful not to push myself too hard. The trail rose and fell gently, with occasional rocky patches where I had to watch my footing. By midday, I reached a small clearing near a creek. The water was clear and cold. I knelt down and drank some, refilling my water bottle. The sun was higher now, filtering through the trees and casting dappled light across the forest floor. I ate a small snack, a granola bar and some dried fruit, while sitting on a fallen log. There was something calming about the sound of flowing water mixed with the bird calls. I checked my map and compass carefully. The next part of the trail was supposed to be less defined, a faint path leading up a ridge and then down toward an old logging road that should lead back to the main trailhead. The guidebook had warned about that section being easy to get lost in if you weren't paying attention. I felt confident, though. I'd hiked similar terrain before. As I started up the ridge, the forest grew denser again. The ground was uneven and steep in places, roots twisting across the path like natural hurdles. The trees stood closer together, their thick trunks casting deep shadows even in the afternoon sun. The air grew cooler, damp with the smell of moss and decaying leaves. The soundscape changed too. Birdsong faded, replaced by the soft crunch of my boots and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. After a while, the trail seemed to vanish. There was no clear path, only scattered footprints and broken branches suggesting that someone else had passed this way recently. I stopped and pulled out my compass, checking my bearings carefully. I moved slowly, trying to keep track of landmarks. Oddly shaped trees, large rocks, a fallen tree that lay like a giant bridge across a small ravine. I made steady progress for an hour or so. Then something changed. The forest grew unnaturally quiet. I mean, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like a blanket smothering every sound.
No birds.
No rustling animals, not even the wind. I stopped and looked around, trying to understand why. The trees were still, their branches motionless. The air was still almost thick. I didn't like it, not one bit. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, the kind of feeling that something was watching or waiting, but I could see nothing. No movement, no eyes in the shadows, just the oppressive silence. I told myself it was my imagination. The forest could get quiet sometimes. Maybe the animals sensed danger or something. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I kept moving, but faster now, my eyes scanning every inch around me. The trail was supposed to come out onto that old logging road soon, and I was counting on that. But as I pushed forward, the terrain became rougher. The ground sloped sharply, and thick undergrowth tangled my legs. I had to use my hands to pull myself up some sections. At one point, I stumbled over a large root and fell hard. My knee scraped against the rough bark of a tree. I felt a sharp sting, but nothing broken. I took a moment to catch my breath, scanning the area to make sure nothing was nearby. That same silence remained, heavy and all-encompassing. I started to wonder if I had made a wrong turn. The map and compass said I was on track, but the trail was so faint it felt like I was just wandering through the woods. I slowed down, trying to mark my path by breaking some small branches and leaving piles of stones here and there. Hours passed, or maybe less. Time lost meaning. The sun was lower now, but I still couldn't see the logging road or any sign of civilization. My legs were tired, my stomach a dull ache from hunger and thirst. I drank water sparingly, careful to ration what I had left. As the afternoon turned to early evening, I realized something important. I was lost. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Lost. No cell signal. No nearby hikers. No clear trail. Just me and this endless forest, stretching in every direction. Panic tried to rise inside me, but I fought it down. Panic would not help me now. I sat down on a mossy rock, breathing deeply. I pulled out my flashlight and checked the batteries. Still good. I took out my emergency whistle and clipped it to my jacket. I needed a plan. I remembered what I'd read about being lost in the woods. Stay put if unsure. Use the whistle to signal. Try to find a high spot to get a better view. I looked around. The ridge was the highest point nearby. I decided to head back that way, hoping to get some kind of view or landmark. Moving carefully, I climbed up again, muscles aching, lungs burning from the effort. At the top, the trees thinned slightly. I climbed a big boulder and looked out. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions. No roads, no clearings, no smoke or signs of life. Just trees and shadows. The sky was fading into shades of orange and purple as the sun set. The cold started to bite. I pulled my jacket tighter, shivering. I turned on my flashlight and started moving downhill, hoping to find the logging road before dark. I should have stayed put, but I kept going. The light from the flashlight was weak, barely cutting through the thick trees. Every sound was magnified, the snap of a branch, the crunch of leaves. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain I heard footsteps behind me, or maybe branches cracking. I knew it was probably just the forest playing tricks on me, but the fear wouldn't go away. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a shallow ditch filled with water. I slipped, hitting my elbow hard on a rock. The pain was sharp and cold water soaked through my jacket sleeve. I cursed under my breath but forced myself up. I could hear something else now, a low sound like heavy breathing or growling. My breath caught in my throat. I froze. It was close. I scanned the shadows, shining my flashlight around desperately. Nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Large, quick, and low to the ground. Something was there, just beyond the trees. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. Adrenaline surged through me, giving me strength I didn't know I had. My legs pumped harder, heart racing. I pushed through the bushes, over rocks, and down slippery slopes. The sounds followed me, heavy footsteps breaking branches, crashing through underbrush. I was being chased. I didn't look back. After what felt like forever, I broke through the trees into a wide clearing. The logging road lay ahead, a rough gravel path cutting through the forest. I sprinted onto the road, my breath ragged. I could hear the sounds fade behind me. Whatever it was, it didn't follow me onto the open path. I ran down the logging road, putting distance between myself and the trees. After a while, I found a better trail that led back toward the main trailhead. The sun was almost gone now, replaced by the cool dark of night. Finally, I stumbled out of the forest onto a narrow dirt road that led to a small ranger station. The lights inside were still on. I banged on the door until someone answered. The ranger listened to my story, eyes wide with concern. She called for help, and soon a team came to escort me back safely. It turned out that the forest was home to a large, aggressive black bear with cubs nearby. The bear had been known to attack anyone who came too close. The quiet I had felt, the heavy silence, was the forest holding its breath, warning me without words. I never went back to that trail. The memory stayed with me, the weight of being utterly alone in the wild, hunted by something real and dangerous. It wasn't some ghost story or fairy tale. It was the raw truth of nature, beautiful but unforgiving. From then on, I respected the forest more than ever, prepared better, never took the quiet for granted. I never planned on being scared that day. It was supposed to be just a normal hike, nothing more. I'd been hiking for years, always careful, always prepared, and I never expected to feel fear like that out in the wilderness. But that day, everything changed. The forest looked the same, the path was familiar, and the sun was shining, but something about the air made my skin crawl. I didn't notice it at first, not until it was too late. I started early in the morning, before the sun was fully up. The air was cool and crisp, and the forest was quiet except for the sound of my boots crunching on the dry leaves and twigs. I like to hike alone. I need the silence, the chance to think without distractions. This trail was one I'd done before. It wasn't too long, about 8 miles round trip, with a few steep parts but nothing too difficult. I packed light water, some snacks, a map, and my small first aid kit. I also carried a whistle and a flashlight just in case. The trail wound through dense pine trees and crossed over little streams. The morning light filtered through the branches in slanted rays, making everything look golden. Birds sang here and there, and I stopped a few times to listen. The smell of pine and wet earth was strong. It was peaceful. I felt good. A few miles in, I reached a small clearing near a creek. I sat down on a fallen log to rest and drink some water. I checked the map. I was right on track. I wasn't in a hurry. Hiking for me isn't about speed. It's about being out in nature, feeling part of something bigger, even if just for a few hours. After the break, I started again. The trail got steeper and the trees grew thicker. I noticed something odd as I walked. The usual trail markers were missing. Normally, someone had painted bright orange ribbons on the branches or tied small signs to trees. But here, there was nothing. I thought maybe it was because it was a less popular trail. That didn't bother me. I had the map and my compass. The sun climbed higher and the temperature rose. I felt sweat run down my back. The forest seemed to close in around me. The path twisted and turned, and at one point I had to climb over a fallen tree trunk. My legs felt tired, but I was okay. Suddenly, the trail ended. I stopped and looked around. No more beaten path, just forest, dense and wild. I checked the map again. According to it, the trail should continue a few yards ahead. But I saw no signs of a path, no footprints, no broken branches. Just thick undergrowth. My heart beat faster. I felt a strange tightness in my chest. I thought maybe the trail had been washed out by rain or blocked by fallen trees. I didn't panic. I decided to try to find the path by pushing through the bushes carefully. I didn't want to turn back after all the effort. I took out my compass and checked my direction. I walked slowly, making sure I didn't lose my bearings. As I moved through the thick forest, the sounds of birds disappeared. The forest felt silent except for the soft crackling of dry leaves under my feet. The sunlight barely reached the ground here. The trees were tall and close together. I felt a cold breeze, which seemed strange for such a warm day. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic sound, like something heavy moving slowly nearby. I stopped and listened. My heart was pounding now. I couldn't see anything through the trees. I called out quietly, but no answer. My mind raced with all the possible things that could be making that noise. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a bear. I stayed calm and kept moving, but more carefully. Minutes passed. The sound came again, closer this time. It wasn't fast, but steady. I looked around, trying to find the source. I caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, big, dark shapes shifting slowly. I froze. I thought about turning back, but I wasn't sure which way to go. The way I came was several miles away, and I didn't want to get lost. Suddenly, a large animal stepped into the clearing. It was a bear, big, dark brown with thick fur. It was looking straight at me. My heart stopped. I remembered all the advice I'd read about bear encounters. Stay calm, don't run, back away slowly. I didn't move. I just looked at it, trying not to seem like a threat. The bear grunted and took a few steps forward. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving it. It didn't chase me, but I knew I was close to danger. I kept moving backward until I reached a big tree and climbed it as fast as I could. I sat on a thick branch about 10 feet up and watched the bear below. Paced the clearing for a while, then disappeared into the forest. I stayed in the tree for a long time, catching my breath, trying to calm down. I thought about my options. I was high off the ground and safe, but I was still lost in the middle of the forest. I had no signal on my phone. I checked my water supply, less than half left. My snacks were untouched because I hadn't wanted to stop before. After the bear left, I climbed down carefully and tried to find the trail again. I walked slowly, following my compass, but everything looked the same. Trees, bushes, no clear path. The sky started to darken. Clouds covered the sun. I realized I'd been out longer than I thought. Panic began to creep in. I was cold, hungry, and lost. I thought about the possibility of spending the night in the forest. I didn't have a tent or a sleeping bag, only my light jacket. The temperature would drop fast after sunset. I didn't want to be out here alone and unprepared. I kept walking, hoping to find the trail or a clearing. The forest grew thicker. The underbrush scratched at my legs and arms. My boots slipped on wet rocks near a small stream. I fell once, scraping my knee. Pain was sharp but bearable. As the light faded, I found a small cave-like opening under a rock ledge. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than nothing. I sat down, wrapping my jacket around me. I drank the last of my water and ate a few bites of my granola bar. I thought about what I'd do in the morning. I tried to sleep, but the forest noises kept me awake. Distant rustling, twigs snapping, birds calling out their last songs before night. I felt vulnerable and small. The darkness was deep and complete. At some point, I heard footsteps nearby. Not animal sounds, but human. Someone was moving through the forest close to me. I froze, listening. The steps stopped. I held my breath, waiting. After several minutes, the footsteps moved away. I didn't dare move or make a sound. I wondered if it was a hunter, a lost hiker, or someone worse. Morning came slowly. The sky was gray and cloudy. I decided I couldn't wait for rescue. I had to find my way out myself. I packed up and started walking carefully, following the direction my compass showed. Hours passed. I was tired, hungry, and my clothes were soaked from the morning dew and rain that started to fall. The rain was light but steady. I kept moving, slipping and stumbling on wet leaves and mud. Then, just when I was starting to lose hope, I saw something ahead. A small wooden sign, weathered but visible. It pointed to the nearest ranger station, about 2 miles away. My heart lifted. I quickened my pace, pushing through the forest with renewed energy. Finally, I saw the edge of the forest and a gravel road. I followed it until I found a small ranger station. A man there gave me water and a blanket. I told him my story in short, too tired to talk much. He radioed for help and made sure I was safe. Later, after resting and eating, I realized how close I'd come to disaster. I learned a lot that day, about respect for nature, about being prepared, about staying calm in a crisis. The forest had tested me, pushed me to my limits, and I survived because I didn't give up. I never went back to that trail, but I carry that day with me. The fear, the loneliness, the strength it took to keep going. It was real, it was terrifying, and it changed me. I had taken time off from work to go on a solo hiking trip. I wanted quiet, space, time away from everything. I was tired of my apartment, tired of the sounds of the city, tired of people. I had planned out a route in a national forest that wasn't too popular, a part of the Rocky Mountains that most hikers didn't bother with because it was deep, remote, and there were no social media photo spots. I liked that. I didn't want to run into anybody. I drove 7 hours from home, parked on a gravel pull-off at the base of a dirt forest road, and started my hike early in the morning. My plan was to hike about 12 miles into the wilderness, set up camp near a stream I saw on the topographic map, and spend 3 nights out there, moving camp once but mostly staying within that same valley.
No trals.
Just navigation by compass and map. I had done this before. I wasn't reckless about it. I carried an emergency beacon, a water filter, plenty of food, and extra gear. I even left my route plan with a friend, who agreed to check in on me in 5 days if she hadn't heard back. The first day went smoothly. The air was crisp, and the forest was full of the usual sounds. Birds, wind through trees, the creaking of old trunks. I moved slowly but steadily uphill through the woods. After about 6 miles, I stopped to refill water from a cold stream, then pressed on, passing through thick forest and patches of open granite. Around late afternoon, I reached the valley where I planned to set up camp. It was quiet, green, and peaceful. The stream ran across the valley floor, and there was a flat patch of dry ground nearby that seemed perfect for the tent. I set up camp, ate a cold dinner from a foil pack, and sat watching the trees darken around me. That night, I lay awake a little longer than usual, just listening. But nothing was off. I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and packed a light day pack to explore the ridge that bordered the east side of the valley. I didn't plan to climb it, just explore the lower slopes and look for interesting spots. Maybe I'd come back and move camp up there the next day if it was better. As I hiked along the ridge's base, I noticed that the slope on one side became steeper, with large boulders scattered around and some dense pine growth higher up. I had to scramble over some rocks and duck under fallen logs. After another hour or so of wandering and climbing, I found something odd. At first, it was just a strange patch of dirt in the middle of all the rocks. It looked like it had been dug and then filled back in. The ground there wasn't like the rest. It was looser, lighter, disturbed. I could see what looked like tool marks in the dirt, not from animals. Flat lines, human-made. I stood over it for a few seconds, unsure what I was looking at. It looked fresh. Not hours fresh, but maybe a few weeks. I crouched and pressed my hand into the dirt. It was softer than everything else around it. Something about it bothered me, but I didn't know what exactly. It was just weird. Why would someone dig a hole here, in the middle of nowhere? It was a hard area to reach. There were no trails, no cabins, nothing nearby. You wouldn't bury trash here. You wouldn't dig here unless you had a reason. I didn't have a shovel, but I did have a small camping trowel. I figured I'd poke around just to see. Maybe it was an old fire pit, maybe someone buried gear, who knows. I started digging, just scooping out small chunks of the topsoil. About a foot down, I hit something. It made a soft knock. I cleared more dirt away and saw metal. It looked like a handle at first, something smooth and rounded. But then I realized it wasn't part of any camping gear. It was a metal pipe. I kept brushing dirt away slowly. The pipe was about 4 inches wide and looked old, but not rusted completely. Curved downward at an angle. The more I cleared away, the more confused I got. It wasn't part of any machine I could think of. I started to feel uncomfortable. Something about finding it buried there, out here with no reason for it to be there, gave me a strange tight feeling in my chest. I was about to stop when I uncovered what looked like a latch. It was part of a box or maybe a hatch of some kind. And right then I had this moment where I wanted to just get up and walk away. I couldn't explain it, but I suddenly didn't want to be there anymore. But curiosity got the better of me. I pulled harder at the dirt, and the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. I had found a sealed metal hatch. The pipe I had seen was probably a vent. It was bolted shut and buried deliberately. It was maybe 2 feet across, round, heavy-looking. I touched the bolts. They were real, not decorative. This thing had been sealed tight, then buried. At that point, I stopped. I didn't have the tools to open it, and more importantly, I didn't want to. My gut told me to leave it alone. Whatever it wasn't part of any park system. It wasn't weather equipment, and it wasn't legal. Someone had gone out of their way to bury it here, far from everything. I stood, backed up, and looked around. The ridge rose up above me, silent, thick with trees. The sun was high, but the shadows felt darker. I started to feel watched, even though I saw nothing. I marked the spot on my map just in case, then turned and left. As I made my way back to camp, I started hearing things. Not voices or anything supernatural, just small things. Sticks cracking, a soft thud behind me. I'd stop and look, and there'd be nothing. But I had hiked enough to know the difference between forest sounds and something following. And this felt like the second one. I picked up my pace. By the time I got back to camp, my heart was thumping hard. I didn't eat. I just sat listening. The woods around me were too quiet now. I didn't want to be there anymore, not in that valley. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was an old bomb shelter or a hunter's stash or something harmless. That night was hard. I barely slept. Every tiny sound made my body tense up. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow outside the tent, but it could have been nothing. Still, I held my knife all night. The next morning, I packed everything up. I was done. I wanted out. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just packed fast, checked my compass, and started heading back the way I came. The hike back should have taken me 6 hours. Took over 10. Every so often, I'd hear something behind me. Not loud, but steady. Like someone walking when I walked, stopping when I stopped. Once I turned fast and thought I saw a flash of movement between trees, but it was too far to be sure. I left the trail route I came in on. I started cutting across terrain, trying to make a faster line out. It only made things worse. I got turned around more than once. My GPS wouldn't lock in properly. It kept stalling or showing the same location for minutes at a time. I tried my map and compass, but I had to guess sometimes. It started raining lightly in the afternoon, making everything harder to walk through.
Wet branches, slippery rocks.
My clothes got soaked, and I was sweating underneath them. At one point, I climbed a ridge I thought would take me back toward the road. When I reached the top and looked down the other side, I saw the valley again, the same valley I had camped in. I had gone in a full circle. I wanted to scream. I sat down hard on a rock and just breathed for a few minutes. The trees around me creaked. The wind had picked up. I was angry at myself, but also scared. I had marked my path on the map. I had taken compass readings. I hadn't just wandered, but I was still back here. I didn't go back to the old campsite. Couldn't. I just started heading south as straight as I could, using the sun and compass. I kept moving for hours, and by the time it started getting dark, I found a dry patch under a thick pine canopy and set up the tent fast. That night was the worst. Something moved around the tent just after midnight. I was sure of it. Slow, soft steps. I didn't move. I just lay there, knife in hand, heart pounding. Then I heard breathing. Quiet, not animal-like, just human, but faint, like someone was standing a few feet from the tent, breathing shallow. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, there was nothing there. No tracks I could see, but I didn't look hard. I packed in 10 minutes and started walking again, pushing through the brush without a break. Finally, by afternoon, I found the forest road. It was still a few miles from where my car was, but I had never been so relieved. I followed it downhill. My legs ached, my feet were blistered, and my throat was dry. When I reached the pull-off, my car was still there. Nothing looked touched. I got in, locked the doors, and didn't move for 5 minutes. I drove straight to a gas station with signal and sent my check-in message. Then I drove home without stopping. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I haven't gone hiking alone. I think about that hatch every day. I've tried to find anything about it online. Maps, forums, old equipment buried in the Rockies. Nothing. I didn't report it. I thought about it, but how do you explain something like that without sounding insane? And what would they even do? But sometimes I wonder who buried it, or why. And more than that, I wonder if someone saw me uncover it. The breathing outside my tent wasn't... I've always loved hiking. The feeling of putting one foot in front of the other, surrounded by nothing but trees, rocks, and open sky. has always calmed me like nothing else. It's like the world shrinks down to just me and the trail, and all the noise from the city fades away. The smell of pine needles, the crunch of dry leaves under my boots, the cold air brushing against my face. These things bring a kind of peace that I never found anywhere else. One late summer morning, I decided to hike a trail I had heard about but never explored before. It was a remote path, far from the usual crowded routes, and I liked the idea of being out there alone with no distractions. The weather forecast promised clear skies, cool temperatures, and light winds, perfect hiking weather. I packed my backpack carefully: water, snacks, a first aid kit, a map, my compass, a flashlight, a fully charged phone, and some warm clothes just in case. I double-checked everything before heading out, feeling a rush of excitement. The trailhead was about an hour's drive from my home. When I arrived, the parking lot was empty except for a single old pickup truck parked near the entrance. The truck looked worn and dusty, like it hadn't been moved in a while. It didn't bother me. I was used to seeing odd vehicles at trailheads in remote areas. I strapped on my backpack, tightened my boots, and started walking. The path led me into a dense forest, with tall trees blocking most of the sunlight. The air was fresh but humid, and the sounds of birds chirping and small animals rustling in the underbrush filled the silence. I followed the marked trail, paying close attention to the small wooden signs nailed to trees, which guided me deeper into the wilderness. After an hour of steady walking, I reached a small clearing. The sun peeked through the trees, warming the earth and lighting up a cluster of wildflowers. I stopped for a moment to take it all in. The trail then climbed steeply, winding along a ridge with a narrow dirt path. The ground was loose in places, and I had to watch my footing carefully. As I climbed, I noticed the forest becoming quieter. The usual bird calls faded away, replaced by an eerie stillness that made my skin prickle. I tried to shake off the feeling, blaming it on being in unfamiliar territory. The sun was high now, and I was sweating under my jacket. I stopped again to drink water and eat a small snack. I checked my map and compass frequently. The trail wasn't well maintained, and sometimes I had to look carefully for the faint markers carved into tree trunks. I felt a little uneasy because I didn't see any other hikers, and the isolation was heavier than usual. After another 2 hours, I reached the top of the ridge. The view was breathtaking. Miles of forest stretched out below me, the tops of trees rippling in the breeze like a green ocean. I stood there for a while, feeling proud and alive. But as I started to descend, things took a turn. The trail down was steeper and less distinct. The dirt was loose and mixed with fallen leaves, making it slippery. I moved carefully, but suddenly my foot slipped on a patch of wet moss. I tumbled forward, hitting my knees and scraping my palms against sharp rocks. The pain was sharp but bearable. I took a moment to breathe deeply and wipe the dirt from my face. I checked my legs. Nothing broken, just bruises and scrapes. But my left ankle twisted awkwardly during the fall. I tried to put weight on it and winced. It was swollen quickly, and I knew I had to be careful. Hiking with a bad ankle wasn't impossible, but it would slow me down a lot. I decided to keep moving, limping carefully along the trail, hoping to reach a safer spot before nightfall. The forest around me darkened as the sun began to lower behind the hills. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on, its small beam cutting through the shadows. As I went deeper into the woods, the trail became even harder to follow. The markers were faint or missing in places, and the path was often blocked by fallen branches and thick brush. I had to push my way through, scratching my arms and legs on thorns and sharp twigs. My ankle throbbed with every step. After a while, I realized I had lost the trail entirely. I stopped, trying to calm my racing heart. I pulled out my map and compass again, but the dense canopy above distorted my sense of direction. The compass needle wobbled uncertainly, and the map's details were hard to match to the confusing tangle of trees and shadows around me. Panic started to creep in. I was miles from the car, with a twisted ankle, no clear path, and night closing fast. I knew the forest well enough to understand that staying put was usually better if lost, but the cold and darkness made that feel impossible. I decided to keep moving downhill, hoping to find a creek or road I remembered passing on the map. My steps were slow and painful, but I kept going, following the slope of the land as best as I could. The forest grew thicker, the trees crowding close together and blocking the moonlight. Hours passed. I was exhausted, hungry, and the pain in my ankle was unbearable. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my legs trembling. I started to hear strange noises, branches snapping far off, twigs crunching as if something was moving nearby. My heart pounded. I slowed down, listening, trying to tell if it was an animal or just the wind. Suddenly, I heard a low growl. My breath caught. The sound came closer, then stopped. I froze, barely daring to breathe. My mind raced through the possibilities. A bear, a mountain lion, or maybe a wild dog. I remembered stories of hikers encountering aggressive animals when they were alone and vulnerable. I wished I had brought bear spray. The growl turned into a series of snorts and grunts. I slowly scanned the dark underbrush with my flashlight. A large figure moved between the trees, too big to be a deer or fox. I backed away slowly, trying not to trip, keeping my eyes on the creature. It was a big black bear. It stood on all fours, sniffing the air. I tried to make myself look bigger, raising my arms and speaking softly to calm it down. But inside, I was terrified. The bear's eyes locked on me. For a tense moment, we just stared at each other. Then, the bear turned and padded away, disappearing into the night. My legs shook with relief and fear. I knew I had to move quickly, but carefully. The forest felt alive with danger, every sound amplified by my tired mind. I kept going, following the faint sound of running water. After what felt like forever, I found a narrow creek. The cold water was a relief when I splashed it on my face and ankles. I decided to follow the creek downstream, hoping it would lead to a road or campsite. The terrain was tricky: wet rocks, slippery moss, and sharp branches. My ankle hurt with every step, but I forced myself forward, focusing on the sound of the water. The moon was high now, and the light helped me see better, but it also made the forest feel colder and more alien. After a long, slow walk, I finally saw faint lights ahead. They looked like lanterns or flashlights moving in the distance. I called out, hoping someone would hear me. My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it was enough. The lights came closer, and soon I was surrounded by a small group of hikers with a campfire. They helped me sit down, offered water and food, and called for help on their radio. I told them about my ankle and getting lost. Soon, a rescue team arrived with a stretcher. They carefully strapped me in and carried me back to the trailhead. The whole experience lasted nearly 24 hours. From the excitement of starting my hike to the terror of being lost and injured alone in the dark woods. I learned a lot about how quickly things can change in nature and how important it is to be prepared for the worst. Back home, after days of rest and recovery, I thought about the forest's silence, the weight of loneliness, and the fear that crept up when I realized I was truly alone. The forest is beautiful, but it's also wild and unpredictable. I respect it more now. Most of all, I'm grateful. Grateful for the hikers who found me, for the rescue team that saved me, and for my own stubbornness to keep going, even when my body wanted to give up. That day taught me that no matter how much you think you know, nature always holds surprises. And sometimes you have to fight harder than you ever imagined just to make it home. Started as a normal morning. I had planned this hike weeks in advance, picking a trail I hadn't been on before, deep in a national forest known for its dense woods and rugged terrain. The trail was supposed to be around 12 miles round trip. Not too difficult, but remote enough to offer some quiet and solitude. I wanted a break from everything: work, noise, people, just me and the forest. I left my car in the small dirt parking area before sunrise. The air was cold but fresh, the kind of cold that wakes you up and clears your mind. I tightened my boots, adjusted my backpack, and started walking. The path was narrow and uneven, covered with fallen leaves and pine needles. It curved up and down through thick groups of fir trees, with occasional clearings where the sky opened up. At first, the forest was calm, peaceful.
Birds sang quietly.
The occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. I breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. I moved steadily, enjoying the slow rhythm of my steps. The trail climbed steadily, and I took breaks every so often to drink water and take in the view from rocky ledges. The sun came up fully, filtering through the tall trees and casting long shadows. Around mid-morning, I reached a fork in the trail. One path was wider and looked more traveled, the other narrower and less clear. According to the map I had, the narrower trail was a shortcut. I hesitated, then decided to take the narrower path to save some time. Almost immediately, the trail got rougher. The path was less worn, branches scratched at my arms, and I had to duck under low limbs. The ground was uneven, roots sticking up like old bones. I was careful with each step, focusing on not twisting an ankle or slipping. The forest grew denser here, the trees taller and closer together. The sun barely reached the ground, felt cooler and darker. After about an hour, the path seemed to end at a small creek. The water was clear but fast-running, and the banks were steep and slippery with mud. There was no bridge. I looked around, hoping to find a place to cross safely, but the edges were unstable. I thought about turning back and taking the longer path, but I was confident I could find a way across. I found a few big rocks near the water and carefully hopped from one to the other. My heart raced with the effort to keep balance on the wet stones. At one point, I slipped, my foot skidding on moss. I grabbed a branch, narrowly stopping myself from falling into the cold water. My hands got muddy and wet, but I managed to cross. On the other side, the trail was even less clear. It disappeared almost entirely into the thick underbrush. I thought about turning around, but I was stubborn. I told myself I could find the trail again soon. The forest here was silent. No birds, no rustling animals, no wind. Just an eerie stillness. My steps sounded too loud, breaking the quiet. I felt exposed and uneasy. My eyes scanned the trees and bushes constantly, watching for anything unusual. I moved slowly, cutting branches and pushing aside leaves. The sun was high now, but I felt like I was trapped in shadow. Time started to blur. I lost track of how long I had been walking through the thick undergrowth. I tried to use the GPS on my phone, but the signal was weak or non-existent. The screen flickered, then died. I had no map with me, no compass, no way to check my direction. Panic crept in. I stopped and sat on a fallen log, trying to calm down. I drank water slowly and thought. I could try to backtrack the way I came, but the creek crossing was tricky and I wasn't sure I could find the right place again. I could try to move forward, hoping the trail would reappear. Or I could stay put and wait for help, but I was miles from the parking lot and no one knew I was here. I forced myself to stand and keep moving. I told myself to stay calm and focused. I looked for any sign of the trail, a broken branch, a footprint, a piece of litter maybe, but there was nothing. Then, as the sun began to lower, I heard something. At first, just a faint rustle in the bushes, then a sharp crack of a branch breaking. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. I turned slowly, looking for the source. There was nothing there, just trees and shadows. The noise came again, closer this time. Footsteps? Heavy and slow? Couldn't tell. The forest seemed to close in around me. My hands shook. I thought about calling out, but I knew no one would hear me. I felt utterly alone and vulnerable. I moved quickly now, pushing through the brush, trying to find any sign of the trail or a way out. The sun disappeared behind the trees. The forest grew darker and colder. Then I saw it. A figure standing just a few yards ahead, barely visible through the shadows. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline of a man, tall and still. My breath caught. I stopped moving. The figure didn't move either. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then, slowly, he started walking towards me. Fear exploded inside me. I turned and ran without thinking, crashing through the trees and bushes, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I didn't look back. I just ran, following the vague sense of direction I thought was toward the parking lot. My legs burned. My lungs screamed. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would burst. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing. My breath came in gasps and my vision blurred. The clearing was small but open to the sky. I collapsed against a tree, shaking. I waited, listening. No footsteps behind me, no figure in the shadows. I thought I was safe. Then I heard a low growl. Not a human sound, but an animal. A wolf or a large dog. I turned slowly and saw two eyes glowing in the dark under the trees at the edge of the clearing. The eyes moved closer, reflecting the moonlight. I stood up, shaking. The animal stepped into the light. It was a big black dog, thin and wild, with dirty fur matted in places. It growled again, low and threatening. I looked around for a stick or rock to defend myself, but my hands were numb and I couldn't find anything useful. The dog advanced a few steps. I backed away toward the center of the clearing. My mind raced. I had read about animal behavior. I knew not to turn my back. I tried to look big, waving my arms slowly to appear threatening. The dog hesitated. Suddenly, I heard another noise from the trees. Footsteps, more than one. The dog growled louder, then turned and disappeared into the woods. I collapsed back to the ground, crying with relief. I didn't know what had saved me. The footsteps, the dog's fear, or just luck. I stayed in the clearing until dawn, too scared to move. When the first light broke, I carefully walked toward where I thought the trail should be. I walked for a long time, still lost but moving. Eventually, I found a small path. It was narrow and rough, but definitely a trail. I followed it slowly, resting when I needed to. The forest began to thin out. I heard a distant sound of cars and people. Finally, I saw the dirt parking lot where I had left my car hours ago. I ran the last few steps, tears streaming down my face. I was exhausted, dirty, and scared, but I was alive. I never took the shortcut again. I never went back to that part of the forest. And I never underestimated how quickly a peaceful hike can turn into a nightmare. I remember the day I decided to go hiking like it was yesterday, though it's been months now. It started out as a simple plan, one I had done many times before. I wanted to spend the day in the woods, away from the city noise, the phones, the endless distractions. Just me, the trees, and the trail. But that day didn't turn out like any other. It became a nightmare I couldn't forget. I woke early, before the sun was even up, feeling the chill in the air of early spring. The sky was still dark, but a little pale light peeked through the clouds. I packed my backpack carefully: water, snacks, a first aid kit, a map, a compass, and some extra clothes. I didn't want to be caught unprepared. I had done this hike many times, a trail deep in the forest about 2 hours from town. I knew the path well, or so I thought. Driving to the trailhead, the roads were empty. The forest around looked quiet and calm, the trees tall and straight, their branches bare but starting to bud with fresh green. I parked my car and took a deep breath. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I started walking on the narrow dirt path that wound into the woods. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky soft pink and orange. Birds began to sing, small flitting sounds that made me smile. I felt good. At first, everything was perfect. The trail was familiar and easy to follow. I passed small clearings, patches of wildflowers, and the occasional fallen log. The ground was soft with leaves and moss, and the sound of my boots crunching was steady and comforting. I saw squirrels darting up trees and heard the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The temperature was cool but not cold, just right for walking. I kept my pace steady, enjoying the fresh air and the peacefulness. After a couple of hours, I reached a fork in the trail. Normally, I would have taken the left path, which led to a small lake where I liked to rest. But that day, I noticed the right path looked less used and overgrown. Curiosity got the better of me. I thought maybe I could explore somewhere new, maybe find a hidden spot. It was a mistake I would soon regret. The right path was narrower and rougher. Branches brushed my arms, and the undergrowth scratched at my legs. The sounds of birds and animals became fewer. The trees were denser here, blocking more sunlight. The trail twisted and turned unpredictably. I checked my map, but this side path wasn't marked clearly. I told myself I'd follow it for a little while and then turn back if it seemed wrong. But as I went deeper, the feeling in my chest changed. Tightness grew. The woods grew darker, quieter. The trail was harder to see under fallen leaves and broken branches. I had to watch my footing carefully to avoid slipping or stepping on loose rocks. The air was cooler here, damp and heavy. I felt isolated, like the forest was closing in around me. I stopped to drink some water and ate a snack. I looked around, trying to find any signs of the main trail. The trees all looked the same. I pulled out my compass, but the needle was spinning slowly, like something was interfering. My heart started to race. I had no cell phone signal, of course. This part of the woods was too far from any tower. I tried to retrace my steps, but the path was now less clear. I walked back the way I came, but the forest seemed different somehow. The sounds of wildlife had disappeared entirely. Not a bird chirping, not a rustle in the bushes, just silence. The kind of silence that presses down and makes your ears pop. I kept walking, trying to stay calm, but the feeling of being watched crept over me. I looked behind often, half expecting to see someone, but there was no one, just the trees. I kept telling myself I wasn't lost. I knew the forest. I could find my way back. Hours passed. The sky darkened even though it wasn't late afternoon yet. Thick gray clouds rolled in, covering the sun and making the woods look cold and gray. A light drizzle started, then a slow, steady rain. My jacket soaked through quickly. The ground turned muddy, my boots slipping in the wet leaves. I knew I needed shelter. I looked for a dry spot but found none. No caves, no overhanging rocks, just trees and wet ground. I tried to use my emergency blanket, but it barely covered me and offered little warmth. The cold seeped into my bones. I walked some more, trying to find a trail or a landmark. Every tree looked the same. My sense of direction failed me. The compass was still acting strange. I felt panic rising. I stopped, breathing hard, trying to listen for sounds of other hikers or distant roads. Nothing, just the rain on the leaves. I sat on a fallen log, wet and cold, shivering despite my layers. My hands trembled as I tried to open my water bottle, now almost empty. My phone battery was dead, no signal anyway. I felt completely alone. Night fell. It got colder fast. I built a small fire with dry sticks I found under some branches. The fire helped a little, but it was small and smoky. I huddled close, staring into the flames, feeling the fear settle deep inside me. Sleep was impossible. Every sound in the dark forest made me jump. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the call of an owl far away. I felt hunted by shadows and silence. I imagined what would happen if a wild animal found me, or if I fell and broke a bone. Morning came slow and gray. The rain stopped, but the ground was soaked. I was hungry, thirsty, and exhausted. My clothes stuck to me, muddy and cold. I decided I had to move to find the way back, or at least a road. I walked and walked, pushing through brambles and low branches. My feet ached. My legs felt weak. I stumbled several times, scraping my knees and hands. My skin was raw from rubbing against bark and rocks. My backpack was heavy and uncomfortable. Hours passed, maybe more. The forest didn't change. I began to think I was walking in circles. My mind played tricks on me, confusing memories and reality. I found strange markings on some trees, scratches and cuts in the bark. They looked fresh. Someone had been here, but where? I followed the markings, hoping they would lead somewhere. I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. If someone else was nearby, maybe I could find help. But the more I walked, the more the forest felt empty and strange. The silence grew deeper, heavier. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a rustling behind some bushes. My heart slammed in my chest. I froze, eyes wide, trying to see through the thick branches. The noise stopped. Then I heard it again. A soft footstep, slow and careful. Not an animal, something else. I decided not to wait and ran, stumbling through the trees and undergrowth, desperate to get away. The forest was a blur. I didn't look back. My breath came fast and shallow. I just ran, hoping to find the trail or road. After what felt like forever, I saw a break in the trees, a faint line of light. I pushed through one last thicket and found myself on the edge of the forest. There was a dirt road, muddy but clear. Relief washed over me like a wave. I collapsed on the ground, tears mixing with the dirt on my face. I looked back at the trees, dark and endless behind me. I didn't know what had made those noises or who left those marks, but I knew I never wanted to go back. I found a farmhouse nearby. The people there called the local ranger station. They sent help immediately. I was dehydrated, cold, and scratched up, but I was alive. The whole experience stayed with me. I learned that the forest is beautiful but also wild and unpredictable. Even if you think you know it, it can surprise you. I never took the wrong path again, and I never ignored the signs, both on the map and in the silence around me. The trailhead was quiet that morning. I had arrived just as the first faint light crept over the distant ridges, the sky turning soft shades of gray and pale blue. It was early May, and the forest was just beginning to wake from its long winter slumber. The ground was damp from a light rain that had passed through overnight, leaving droplets clinging to the bright green leaves and the wildflowers pushing through the underbrush. The air smelled clean and fresh, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. It was exactly the kind of day I wanted for a long solo hike, away from everything. I had been planning this trip for weeks. Just me, a heavy pack, and the wilderness. The trail started easy enough, a wide dirt path with tree roots weaving across it here and there. I took slow, measured steps, feeling the rhythm of my boots against the ground, the steady beating of my heart in my chest. The forest was alive with sounds. Birdsong from unseen perches, the rustle of small animals in the brush, and the distant trickle of a stream. I breathed it all in deeply. The peace was almost complete, save for the occasional snap of a twig underfoot or the soft swish of my pack as I moved. No one else was around, just the vast expanse of nature stretching in every direction. As the hours passed, the trail began to climb more steeply. The gentle incline turned into a series of switchbacks that pushed me higher and higher into the hills. I could feel the burn in my legs now, my breathing becoming heavier as the air grew thinner and cooler. My clothes were damp with sweat, and the occasional gust of wind carried a chill that made me pull my jacket tighter around me. The trees grew taller and thicker here, their trunks gnarled and ancient, covered in moss and lichen. The forest floor was softer too, padded with fallen leaves and pine needles. I stopped often to rest, taking water from my bottle and nibbling on trail mix. The landscape around me was breathtaking. Vistas opened up between the trees, revealing rolling hills and valleys blanketed in green. The clouds had thickened, turning the sky a dull gray that hinted at rain later. But for now, the weather was steady, and I felt confident. I had done plenty of hikes like this before, and my gear was solid. I was prepared for anything, or so I thought. After several hours, I reached a fork in the trail. A wooden sign, weathered and worn, pointed one way toward a peak summit, and the other toward a small lake nestled in the valley below. I took the left path, heading for the summit. I wanted the view from the top more than anything else. The path here was narrower, less worn, and the forest around me grew dense. The trees leaned in close, their branches forming a thick canopy that filtered the weak sunlight into pale green light. The ground was uneven, strewn with rocks and roots that demanded my attention. I moved slowly, concentrating on each step, careful not to twist an ankle or lose my footing. The trail wound upward in tight turns, sometimes steep enough to make me stop and catch my breath. The silence was heavier here, almost oppressive. The only sounds were my breathing, the crunch of boots on leaf litter, and an occasional bird call. I tried to push away a creeping sense of unease that had begun to settle in my stomach. It was probably just the solitude or maybe the tiredness from the climb. Suddenly, the path opened up to a rocky outcrop. I stepped out onto the ledge and took a deep breath, scanning the horizon. The view was spectacular. The entire valley spread out below me like a vast green sea. Far off, I could see ridges layered one behind the other, fading into the mist. The clouds were thickening, Now a low blanket that smothered the sky, threatening rain. I checked my watch. I had been hiking for nearly 6 hours. It was getting late. I decided to press on toward the summit, which was only a short distance from here. The trail became even rockier, climbing steeply over boulders and loose scree. My hands were out for balance as I scrambled upward. The wind had picked up, cold and sharp, whipping around the ridges and pushing at my jacket. My breath came out in puffs of mist. Then it happened. A sharp crack sounded behind me, a noise that didn't belong to the natural world. My heart jumped. I froze, straining to hear anything else. The forest was silent except for the wind. I waited a moment, telling myself it was just a falling branch or a rock tumbling down the slope. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. It was the kind of sound that sets off alarm bells deep inside. I turned slowly, scanning the trees below the ridge. There was movement, something or someone pushing through the underbrush. The shapes were dark, blurred by distance and shadow, but they moved with purpose, too quickly and too quietly to be deer or other animals. I pulled out my phone to check the time and signal. No service. The forest swallowed the signal whole. My mind raced. I wasn't alone. I had been so focused on the hike that I hadn't thought about other people on the trail. This was a remote area, but not so remote that others didn't visit. Still, the way those figures moved didn't seem casual. It was deliberate, as if they were following me. I debated my options. I could try to rush to the summit and then head back down quickly, or I could retreat the way I had come. The thought of running down the steep trail was not appealing, but neither was staying and waiting for whoever was there to come closer. I chose to move, quietly, but as fast as the rocky terrain would allow. I continued upward. The summit was a small plateau, surrounded by jagged rocks and stunted pines. I reached it in a few minutes, heart pounding, lungs burning. The wind roared here, louder and colder, biting through my clothes and chilling my skin. I stood there looking around. No sign of anyone else. The figures below had vanished. I took a moment to catch my breath and plan my next move. The summit was open, exposed, and with the storm clouds thickening, I knew I couldn't stay long. I checked my map and compass. The descent to the trailhead was a different path, longer but safer and more traveled. I figured it was best to take that route. But as I prepared to leave, I noticed something strange. On the ground near a rock, partially hidden by leaves, was a piece of torn fabric. It looked like part of a jacket or shirt. I picked it up carefully. It was old and dirty, but not something I recognized. The edges were frayed, as if it had been dragged or torn forcibly. That detail sent another chill down my spine. The wind howled louder, and the first drops of rain began to fall. I pulled my hood up and started down the other trail quickly, eyes sharp and senses alert. The forest had changed. The shadows seemed deeper, the trees closer, and the trail less clear. Wet leaves and mud made my footing tricky. I kept hearing sounds behind me. The snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves. Each time I turned, no one was there. I walked faster, my boots sinking into the soft ground. My breathing was ragged now, not just from the exertion but from the rising fear. I had been alone all day, but now the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I clutched my hiking pole like a weapon, scanning the trees and bushes for any sign of movement. Then I saw it, footprints. Fresh footprints in the mud, large and heavy, like someone else had been here recently. They matched my direction, but they were bigger, deeper. Someone had passed through not long ago. Panic began to settle in. I had to get out. I tried calling for help again. No signal. My phone battery was low. I stuffed it back into my pack and focused on the trail. The rain was falling steadily now, soaking me to the bone. The cold crept into my muscles, making them stiff. After what felt like hours, I finally broke through the trees into a clearing where the trail widened. The sound of a road echoed faintly. I pushed on, heart pounding, every sense screaming that I was close to safety. At last, I stumbled onto the gravel parking area where I had left my car. I locked the doors and sat inside, my hands shaking. I called the ranger station and finally got through. I told them what I had seen and felt. They said they would send someone out to check the area. Later, I learned that a group of people had been camping illegally nearby, and some of them were involved in criminal activities. The torn fabric matched what one of them had been wearing. They had been watching the trail, possibly following hikers for some unknown reason. I never went back to that trail. The experience stayed with me, a reminder that nature is wild and beautiful but can also be unpredictable and dangerous. Not because of ghosts or monsters, but because of the people who live outside the law and prey on others. The forest is vast, and sometimes the scariest thing is knowing you are not as alone as you think, even in the middle of nowhere. I never thought a simple day hike could turn into something that would change the way I look at the wilderness forever. I had done plenty of hiking before, long treks, short walks, mountain climbs, and forest trails. Usually, I like to stick to the popular paths where other people would be around, but this time I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to go deeper into the backcountry, somewhere far from other hikers, where the only sounds were nature's own. The morning started like any other. I woke early, packed my backpack carefully, checking my water, food, first aid kit, map, and compass twice. I made sure I had enough layers of clothing for the changing weather. I had my hiking boots tied tight, my hat on, and my sunglasses ready for the sun. The sky was clear, no sign of rain or bad weather. I left my car at the small dirt parking lot near the trailhead, feeling excited and a little nervous. I told myself to be careful but not to worry too much. The trail began well enough. It was a narrow dirt path cutting through dense woods. The trees were tall and thick with green leaves, blocking some of the sunlight but letting patches of brightness fall on the forest floor. Birds were singing, and the wind gently rustled the branches. I felt peaceful and energized as I moved forward, stepping carefully over roots and rocks. After about 2 hours, the trail started to climb steeply. I could feel the burn in my legs, but I liked the challenge. I stopped a few times to catch my breath and take small sips of water. The forest began to thin out a little, and I started to see the tops of distant mountains. The air smelled fresh and piney, with hints of wet earth. I was about halfway through the planned route when I reached a small clearing. The sun was higher now, and I sat on a fallen log to eat a quick snack. As I munched on a granola bar, I looked around. The clearing gave me a good view of the valley below and the ridges beyond. I felt small but connected to everything. I checked my watch. I had been hiking for about 3 hours. I still had a long way to go before the summit I wanted to reach. I stood up and looked for the trail again. That's when I noticed something odd. The path seemed less defined here. The footprints were faint, and the trail markers that I had been following every half mile were nowhere to be seen. I pulled out my map and compass, trying to figure out if I was still on track. The map showed a small stream nearby, and I thought I heard the sound of running water not far from me. I decided to follow that sound to find the stream, thinking it might help me get back on the trail. The ground was soft and damp near the clearing, and I carefully made my way down a slight slope covered in moss and fallen leaves. The water was cold and clear. It trickled over rocks and twisted around tree roots. I filled my bottle and took a few long drinks. The sound of the stream was calming. I followed it upstream, hoping to find the trail again. But after a while, the terrain became rougher. The ground was uneven, with loose stones and thick brush. I had to watch every step to avoid twisting an ankle. The forest grew quieter. The birds stopped singing, and the wind seemed to die down. I felt a strange chill, even though the sun was still bright. My heart beat faster. I told myself to stay calm and keep moving. But as I looked around, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The trees here were older, twisted, and covered in thick moss. The branches hung low, and the light barely reached the ground. I tried to find any sign of the trail, blazes on trees, broken branches, anything, but nothing. I took out my compass and pointed it toward the direction where I thought the trailhead was. I began to walk carefully, pushing through the undergrowth, trying not to make too much noise or trip over roots. After some time, I saw a large rock formation ahead. It looked like a cliff, rising sharply above me. I tried to find a way around it. As I circled the base, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. There were footprints in the soft soil, but they weren't mine. They were fresh, and they headed in the same direction I was going. My mind raced. I was alone in the wilderness, off the trail, and now there was evidence someone else had been here recently. The thought was unsettling, but I told myself not to panic. Maybe it was another hiker, maybe they were lost too. I decided to follow the footprints, hoping to find a person who could help or at least find the main trail again. The footprints led me through dense brush and over fallen logs. The forest was thick, the light dim. I noticed the sound of twigs breaking and leaves crunching underfoot, but I had no clear view of anything or anyone ahead. My nerves were frayed, but I kept moving forward, scanning for any sign of a campsite, a shelter, or a trail. Suddenly, the footprints stopped near a patch of broken branches and trampled grass. I looked carefully and saw signs of a small fire pit surrounded by stones. Someone had been here recently. I felt a surge of relief mixed with unease. Who was this person? Were they friendly? Why had I not seen or heard them? I checked my watch again. The sun was already dipping lower in the sky. I was deeper into the forest than I planned, and I hadn't made much progress toward the summit or the trailhead. I knew I had to make a decision: keep going and risk getting lost in the dark, or try to find a way back now. I decided to turn around and follow my compass back toward where I thought the trailhead was. The forest looked different in the fading light. Shadows grew longer and the temperature dropped. I felt more alone than ever. After some time, I thought I heard something, distant footsteps or maybe a branch snapping. I stopped and listened hard. The silence was thick and heavy. My heart pounded louder. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just an animal or the wind. As I moved carefully, I noticed broken twigs and flattened bushes behind me. Someone or something was following. I didn't want to look back. I quickened my pace, my breath coming fast but steady. I focused on my compass and the sound of the stream I had crossed earlier. I stumbled over a root and almost fell. I caught myself and kept moving, ignoring the rising panic. The footsteps behind me got louder, closer. I forced myself not to run, knowing that running could cause me to fall or get more lost. Suddenly, I broke out into a small clearing. I saw the trail, faint but visible. Relief flooded me. I moved quickly onto the path, heading downhill. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. I didn't look back. I kept going until I saw the bright colors of trail markers. I followed the trail faster now. The forest began to thin, and I heard distant sounds of cars and people from the road near the trailhead. I finally emerged near my car as the last light of the day disappeared. I sat in my car, shaking and exhausted. I checked my phone, no signal. I started the engine and drove away, not looking back. That day taught me a lesson about the wilderness. It's beautiful but unpredictable. Sometimes it can be dangerous just because it's wild and silent. People can be scary too, especially when you are alone and lost. I never went back to that trail again. I never thought a simple hike could turn into one of the most frightening experiences of my life, but it did. It started like any other day, a quiet morning with a cool breeze brushing through the trees, sunlight filtering softly through the leaves. I was alone, just me and my backpack, ready to spend the day on a trail I'd never been on before. The forest was somewhere in the middle of a large national park. Vast, wild, and mostly untouched. I planned to hike deep into the woods, maybe for 10 or 12 miles, just to get away from everything and enjoy nature. The trailhead was easy to find, just off a narrow, gravel road. There were only a few cars parked when I arrived early in the morning, and I took it as a good sign. It meant I'd have plenty of peace. I tightened my hiking boots, slung the pack over my shoulders, and started down the path. The air was crisp and fresh. I could hear birds singing, the wind rustling branches, and the distant babble of a creek. The path was well-worn, soft earth with scattered pine needles and patches of moss, winding between tall pines and oaks. First, everything felt normal. The sun rose higher, warming the forest floor. I stopped a few times to catch my breath, take photos of the wildflowers, and drink water. I even found a flat rock by the creek to rest on, watching minnows swim in the shallow water. The smell of damp earth and pine was strong and comforting. I had packed a light lunch and some snacks, so I ate slowly, savoring the quiet and the solitude. After about 4 hours of hiking, the trail began to climb steadily. The gentle slope grew steeper, and the forest thickened. The trees were closer together here, their roots twisting and breaking through the soil, making the path uneven and harder to follow. I focused on each step, watching for loose rocks and hidden holes. My legs ached a little, but the cool shade helped keep me going. At one point, the trail crossed a narrow ridge. On one side was a steep drop down to a rocky stream, its water rushing white over boulders. On the other side was a dense thicket, branches and brambles tangled tightly together. I paused to look out over the valley below, amazed at the deep green blanket of trees stretching as far as the eye could see. It felt like I was the only person in the world. I continued on, but soon noticed something strange. The trail, which had been clear and marked with orange paint on trees or small cairns of stones, started to disappear. The markers became less frequent and harder to spot. The path itself was fading into the undergrowth. I checked my map and GPS, which told me I was still heading roughly in the right direction, but I was losing the trail. I told myself it was normal for this part of the forest. Some areas didn't get much foot traffic. I slowed down, careful not to get lost. I looked for signs, footprints, broken branches, anything that might show where people had walked. The ground was covered in dry leaves and pine needles, so tracks were hard to spot. I tried to keep the sun at my back so I could maintain a general sense of direction. Then the wind started to pick up. At first, it was just a gentle breeze moving through the branches. But soon, it turned into stronger gusts, shaking the trees and sending leaves swirling. The sky darkened as thick gray clouds rolled in, blocking the sun. I pulled out my rain jacket and put it on, deciding I needed to find shelter soon. The forest here felt different, quieter, heavier somehow. No birds singing anymore, just the sound of wind and leaves. The trail vanished completely. I was walking through dense bushes and small trees, trying to push them aside. My arms were scratched and bleeding slightly from the thorns. My boots slipped on the wet leaves. I kept checking the GPS and compass, but the forest was confusing, with hills and valleys blending together. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong step could send me tumbling down a slope or into a ravine. At one point, I reached a clearing. It wasn't on the map, and I had no idea how I got there. The grass was tall and wet with dew. The sky was almost black now, and a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. I decided I had to stop and make a decision. I was carrying a small first aid kit and extra food, but I was tired and my feet hurt. The rain started lightly at first, then heavier, soaking me through despite my jacket. I looked around the clearing, hoping to spot any sign of the trail or a safe place to wait out the storm. There was a fallen log that I could sit on, and a big pine tree that would block some of the rain. But no shelter. The wind howled through the branches. The temperature dropped quickly, and I started to shiver. I knew I couldn't stay here all night. I tried to find the direction back to the trailhead, but the forest was a blur of shadows and shapes. My phone battery was low, and the GPS was barely working because the clouds blocked the satellite signals. I felt the creeping panic that every hiker fears, being lost in the wilderness, alone, with no clear way out. I tried to stay calm. I took out my emergency whistle and blew 3 short blasts, a standard distress signal. No response. I shouted too, but my voice was swallowed by the wind. I looked for dry branches to build a fire, hoping the smoke or flames might attract attention, but everything was wet. I fumbled with my lighter, my fingers numb and clumsy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I got a small fire going under the shelter of the pine tree. The fire was small, but it gave me some warmth and light. I sat close, wrapping my jacket tighter around me. The storm raged on, lightning flashing in the distance, thunder booming. I tried to conserve my energy, drink water, and eat a few crackers. My mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if no one found me, how long I could last alone out here. Hours passed, or maybe it was only one long hour. The storm finally began to die down. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the wind softened to a gentle breeze. The sky started to lighten in the east, signaling the coming dawn. I felt exhausted, but a small hope returned. I decided to try moving again, following my compass and the faint light. I moved slowly, carefully. My legs were stiff and I kept slipping on the wet ground. After some time, I heard the faint sound of running water. I headed toward it, hoping it was the creek I had seen earlier. The forest was still thick, but the trees looked familiar. I stumbled through the undergrowth, heart pounding. Finally, I reached the creek. I recognized the bend where I had rested earlier. Relief flooded me. I was back on track. I followed the creek downstream, where the trail was easier to see. After another hour or so, I spotted footprints in the mud, a sign that other hikers had passed recently. By late morning, I emerged from the dense forest into a parking lot where a few cars were parked. My legs were sore, my clothes dirty and wet, but I was safe. I found a ranger station nearby and told them what had happened. They explained that the storm had caused some trail markers to wash away and a few sections to be temporarily impassable. That day, I learned how unpredictable the wilderness could be. Even a familiar trail can change in an instant. I realized how important it was to prepare for the worst and respect the power of nature. I was lucky to make it out on my own. The memory of being lost, soaked, and cold stayed with me. A reminder that nature is beautiful, but can also be unforgiving. I had been looking forward to this hiking trip for months. After weeks of planning and checking my gear, I was finally ready to spend a weekend deep in the mountains. The trail I chose was known for its beauty, but also for its remoteness and difficulty. It wasn't the kind of place you just stumble upon. You had to be prepared. I made sure I packed everything I thought I might need. Enough food, plenty of water, extra clothes, a first aid kit, a compass, and a map. I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle it alone. The morning I set out was clear and cool. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows through the tall pine trees that lined the trailhead. The air smelled fresh and earthy, a mix of pine needles, damp soil, and wildflowers. I stepped onto the trail feeling excited and ready for the challenge. At first, the path was easy to follow. It wound gently uphill through a dense forest. Birds called out occasionally, and a squirrel darted across the trail ahead of me. I kept a steady pace, focusing on my breathing and the sound of my boots against the dirt. The trail markers were clear, bright orange blazes painted on tree trunks. I paused often to take in the scenery. A carpet of ferns under tall trees, a sparkling creek that ran alongside the path, wild berries hanging ripe on bushes. After about 3 hours, I reached a small clearing where the forest opened up to reveal a breathtaking view of the valley below. I stopped to rest, sitting on a large rock to eat some trail mix and drink water. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the air. The sky was a brilliant blue, and I could see distant mountain peaks capped with snow. It felt peaceful, like the world was holding its breath. I checked my map and compass, confirming my route. The next section was supposed to be steeper and rougher. The trail narrowed and started to climb sharply. I tightened my backpack straps and began the ascent. The ground was rocky and uneven, with loose stones that shifted underfoot. I had to watch every step carefully to avoid twisting an ankle. My legs burned with effort, but I kept going. As I climbed higher, the forest thinned out. Trees gave way to hardy shrubs and patches of grass that clung to the rocky slopes. The wind picked up, cool and biting. I pulled on my jacket and kept moving, the trail now a faint line etched into the side of the mountain. Sometimes I had to use my hands to steady myself on the rocks. About 5 hours into the hike, I reached the ridge. The view was spectacular, a wide panorama of mountains rolling away in every direction. I paused again to catch my breath and drink more water. I was starting to feel tired, but the sense of accomplishment kept me going. I checked the time. I had planned to set up camp before dark. The trail from the ridge was supposed to descend into a valley where there was a small lake marked on my map. I looked down and could just make out a shimmer of water far below. It was a long way down, but I was determined to reach the lake and find a good place to camp. The descent was slow and careful. The slope was steep, and the soil was loose. Every step required focus and balance. I felt the strain in my knees and ankles, but I pushed on. Halfway down, I slipped on a patch of gravel and caught myself on a tree branch. My heart raced, but I was okay. It was a warning to be more careful. As I continued, the sun started to dip behind the mountains. Shadows lengthened, and the temperature dropped. I knew I had to find my campsite soon. The forest began to close in again, the trees growing taller and thicker. The trail was harder to follow here, less worn, with fallen branches and rocks blocking parts of it. I checked my map again, but something felt off. The trail markers were fewer and farther between. I stopped to look carefully. The path seemed to veer slightly from where I expected. I tried to adjust, but the forest around me all looked the same. Dark trunks, thick underbrush, patches of moss. My confidence wavered. I started to feel a tight knot of worry in my stomach. The sky was darkening fast, the blue fading to deep gray. I needed to find the lake and my campsite before nightfall. I quickened my pace, scanning for any sign of the water. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart jumped. I stopped and listened. The sound was faint but close, something moving through the undergrowth. I waited, still and silent, eyes fixed on the shadows. After a moment, the noise stopped. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a rabbit, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The forest felt different now, less welcoming, more closed in. The trees seemed to press closer, the shadows deeper. I checked my watch. It was nearly 6 in the evening. I had no time to waste. I pushed on, but soon the trail disappeared completely. I was standing in a dense thicket of trees and bushes, no sign of a path anywhere. I pulled out my compass and map again, trying to get my bearings, but the thick canopy overhead blocked the sky, making it hard to find north. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. I figured if I could just find higher ground, I might be able to see the lake or the ridge again and figure out where I was. I started climbing through the underbrush, scrambling over fallen logs and rocks. After about 20 minutes, I broke through the trees onto a small rocky outcrop. The view was patchy, but I could see the lake far below, glittering faintly in the fading light. I felt a rush of relief. If I could just head downhill towards that, I could find my campsite. I set off again, this time more carefully, aiming toward the water. The terrain was rough, and the steep slope made it hard to keep my footing. My legs ached, and my breath came in short gasps. The forest was silent except for the crunch of leaves and twigs under my boots. Suddenly, I heard a sharp crack behind me. I froze. The sound was close and deliberate, like a heavy branch breaking under weight. I turned slowly, scanning the darkening woods. Nothing moved. I told myself to stay calm, but my pulse was pounding. I quickened my pace, eyes darting nervously. Every snap of a twig or rustle made me jump. I kept looking back, but I saw no one. The sun was gone now. Twilight settled deep in the forest. I pulled out my flashlight, but the batteries were weak. The beam was dim and flickering. I knew I couldn't rely on it for long. I moved faster, heading downhill toward the lake. My mind raced with thoughts of what might have caused the noise. The idea that I might not be alone in the forest was frightening. I thought about all the stories of hikers getting lost or worse in these remote mountains. The reality of my situation hit me hard. I was alone, tired, and possibly being followed. I reached the edge of the lake just as it got completely dark. The water was cold and still, reflecting the stars now visible in the sky. I looked around for a spot to set up camp. The ground was rocky and uneven, but I found a small flat area near the shore. I moved quickly to set up my tent, fumbling with the poles and fabric in the dim light. My hands shook, partly from cold and partly from fear and exhaustion. Once the tent was up, I crawled inside and zipped the door closed. I sat down on my sleeping pad, heart still racing. Outside the tent, the forest was silent except for the gentle lapping of the lake water. I tried to steady my breathing and calm my thoughts. I told myself that I was safe here, that the sounds I heard were probably just animals or falling branches. I lay down, pulling my sleeping bag tight around me. I kept my flashlight and knife close at hand, ready for anything. The night stretched long and cold. Every little noise outside made me tense, but I forced myself to stay still and quiet. When dawn finally broke, the first pale light filtered through the trees. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The forest looked peaceful in the morning light. The shadows softened and the air warm again. I packed up my gear quickly, eager to get back on the trail. I followed the lake's edge until I found the trail marker again. The path was clearer in the daylight. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I was back on track. The hike out was slower but steady. I kept my eyes open for any sign of trouble, but the forest was calm and quiet. When I finally reached the trailhead where I started, a sense of triumph filled me. I had made it through the night alone in the wilderness, faced my fears, and found my way back. I learned that nature can be beautiful but also unpredictable and sometimes frightening. The fear I felt was real, not from stories or ghosts, but from the challenge of being truly alone, vulnerable, and unsure. It was a humbling experience, but it made me stronger. When I got home, I cleaned my gear and started planning my next trip. I knew I would be better prepared, more cautious, but also more confident. The mountains were still waiting, and so was I. The air was sharp and cold that morning. I could see my breath puff out in quick little clouds as I stood at the trailhead, staring at the path ahead. The forest looked quiet, almost too quiet, with tall trees stretching far into the sky and their shadows creating a mottled pattern on the dirt trail. I had been planning this solo hike for weeks, a long trek through the mountains, away from everything. I wanted to escape the noise of the city, the constant buzzing of work and phones. Just me, my backpack, and the wilderness. I adjusted my pack one last time, the straps digging slightly into my shoulders. It wasn't light, but I was used to it. Food, water, a small first aid kit, some clothes, a map, and a compass. I trusted those tools. More than my phone, which barely worked here. The trail started easy enough. A gentle slope covered with dry pine needles that crunched softly under my boots. Birds chirped here and there, distant sounds of nature waking up. I kept a steady pace, breathing in the crisp mountain air and watching sunlight filter through the branches. The smell of pine was strong and comforting. After about 2 hours, the path began to narrow. Trees pressed closer, branches brushing against my jacket. I followed the worn dirt trail, which twisted and turned, sometimes crossing small streams where water ran cold and clear over mossy rocks. I stopped for a moment to fill my water bottle and take a bite of a granola bar. The forest felt peaceful but also strange. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. I shook the feeling off and kept moving. Around midday, I reached a fork in the trail. The map showed both paths leading to the same campsite I wanted to reach, but one was shorter and steeper, the other longer but flatter. I chose the shorter one, thinking I'd save time. The trail grew more rugged. Roots and stones jutted out like obstacles, forcing me to watch every step. I could hear the distant rush of a river somewhere below. The air grew cooler and damper as I climbed higher. Small patches of fog hovered just above the ground. I stopped often to catch my breath, wiping sweat from my forehead despite the chill. The trees here were thicker, darker. I noticed how the light faded quickly under their canopy. I told myself to stay focused, to trust the trail. But after about an hour, the path began to look less like a trail and more like an animal track. The dirt was uneven, and I saw no clear signs of recent human footsteps. I stopped and pulled out my map and compass. The compass needle pointed steadily north. I checked my position. According to the map, I was supposed to keep going uphill in a straight line. I put the map away and looked around. The trees were tall and dense, and the forest floor was covered with dead leaves and twigs. No trail markers anywhere. My heart started to beat faster. I backtracked a little and searched for the trail. After several minutes, I found a narrow path, barely visible under fallen branches. It wasn't what I expected, almost like a deer path, but it was going in the right direction. I hesitated but told myself it was just part of the mountain. Trails get less clear sometimes. I pressed on, Hours passed and the forest became thicker, the ground steeper and rockier. My legs ached and my breathing grew heavier. My water was running low. The sky was turning a dull gray as clouds moved in. At one point, I reached a small clearing with a view of the valley below. The trees fell away, revealing a patchwork of fields and rivers far down. I sat on a rock and took a long drink from my bottle. My stomach was empty except for the granola bar I ate earlier. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course. I looked at the compass again. North, straight ahead. I felt a flicker of unease. I knew the trail was supposed to be marked here. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn earlier. I decided to keep moving. Maybe I'd find the campsite soon. But then I saw it, a fallen tree blocking the path. Thick and heavy, its branches tangled in the bushes. I tried to climb over it but slipped on loose bark and scraped my hand on a sharp branch. My fingers stung, bleeding a little. I rested for a moment, rubbing the scratch. I looked around and noticed something else. The forest was quieter now. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind was still. It felt like the woods were watching me. I shook my head. Stop thinking like that. I went around the fallen tree and tried to find the trail on the other side. Minutes later, the path disappeared altogether. There was no clear direction, just dense forest, rocks, and steep slopes. Panic started to creep in. I pulled out my map and compass again. The compass was steady, but the map wasn't helping much. The terrain didn't match what I saw. I took a deep breath. I was lost. The realization hit me hard. I had been so confident, so sure I knew what I was doing. But now I was alone in unfamiliar wilderness with no clear way out. I scanned the trees, trying to find any sign of human presence. A trail marker, a ribbon, footprints. Anything. Nothing. The sky darkened further. A cold wind swept through the branches, making them creak and sway. I checked my watch. It was late afternoon, maybe 4 p.m. I still had some daylight, but not much. I decided to climb to higher ground to get a better view. Maybe I could spot the campsite or a road. The climb was difficult. Rocks loose beneath my feet, branches scratching my face. My legs burned. My pack felt heavier with each step. When I reached the top of a small ridge, I looked out. The view was breathtaking but also terrifying. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions. No clearings, no trails, no signs of people. I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the trees. I sat down, feeling the weight of the situation. The wind chilled me to the bone. I took out my emergency blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders. I still had a little water and a small snack, but I knew I couldn't stay out here all night. I remembered my training. Stay calm, conserve energy, stay put if lost, and try to signal rescuers. I pulled out my whistle and blew 3 short blasts. I waited. Nothing. Then 3 more blasts. Still silence. I put the whistle away and settled in for the night. Darkness fell quickly in the forest. The temperature dropped. I tried to make a small shelter against a tree with branches and leaves. I kept moving to stay warm. I listened to the forest sounds, the rustling of leaves, distant animals, the occasional snap of a twig. Sleep came in short bursts, light and uneasy. At dawn, I woke cold and stiff. I drank the last of my water and ate a small piece of food. I decided to move again, hoping to find a trail or a river. Hours passed. I walked carefully, following the compass needle north as best as I could. At one point, I came to a narrow stream. I followed it downstream, hoping it would lead to a road or a campsite. The forest grew thicker and the ground wetter. My boots soaked. I slipped on a mossy rock and twisted my ankle sharply. Pain shot up my leg. I sat down, biting back tears. I could still walk, but slowly. I rested and wrapped my ankle tightly with part of my shirt. The stream led me to a small clearing with a rusty old sign half buried in dirt and moss. I could barely read the faded letters, but it said something about a trailhead. Hope surged inside me. I followed the direction the sign pointed. After what felt like hours, I finally heard the faint sound of voices. I called out, hoping someone would hear. Soon, a group of hikers appeared on the trail. They looked surprised but relieved to see me. They had a phone with signal and called for help. Later, As we waited for the rescue team, I sat on a log, exhausted and cold but safe. The experience taught me many things: the power of nature, how easy it is to get lost, and the importance of preparation and staying calm. I never took the wilderness lightly again. I set out early one cool autumn morning, the kind of morning where the sky is a pale blue and the air feels fresh but sharp against your skin. The sun was just beginning to climb above the thick line of pine trees that framed the trailhead. I had been planning this hike for weeks, a solo trip through the mountains near my town, a stretch of wilderness I'd never explored before. The forest there was dense, with tall evergreens, pockets of birch, and the ground carpeted in a thick layer of dry needles and fallen leaves. I liked this time of year for hiking. The colors were changing, the air crisp, and the trails less crowded. I carried my pack carefully, light but with all the essentials: water, some snacks, a small first aid kit, my phone with limited signal, a flashlight, and a map I had printed from an online resource. I was confident in my ability to navigate. I had done plenty of solo hikes before, often in the same region, but this day would test more than my map reading skills. The trail started narrow but well-marked, winding gently upward along a small creek. The sound of running water mixed with the rustle of dry leaves underfoot as I stepped carefully over rocks and roots. The air smelled of pine sap, earth, and the faint, distant smoke from a campfire somewhere farther along. I was alone but never really felt isolated. This place was alive with birdsong and the occasional chatter of squirrels. The sun climbed higher as I ascended, casting dappled light through the branches above. The trail got steeper and rockier, and I slowed my pace to steady my breathing. Every few minutes, I stopped to drink water or adjust my pack. The forest around me was thick, and the path twisted unpredictably, but the markings on the trees, little orange triangles, kept me sure I was going the right way. After nearly 2 hours, I reached a clearing at the top of a ridge. From here, the view opened up to a vast stretch of hills rolling away to the horizon. The valley below was shrouded in morning mist, thin ribbons of fog curling like smoke from the trees. I sat on a large rock to rest, ate a granola bar, and soaked in the quiet beauty. This was why I came, to escape, to feel small among the vastness of the wilderness. I checked my map again, noting that the next leg of the hike would take me down a steeper, less traveled path, marked by faded blazes and few signs. The trail here was more rugged, less worn, and the terrain dropped sharply. I was alone, but the solitude was comforting. I had done harder hikes before. As I descended, the forest grew denser again. The canopy thickened, blocking much of the sunlight. The ground was uneven, scattered with loose rocks and fallen branches. I took my time, careful not to slip. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on leaves and the distant call of a hawk. The temperature dropped slightly, and I pulled my jacket tighter. After some time, I realized the trail was getting harder to follow. The orange blazes were fewer and farther between, and some trees looked unmarked. I stopped to check the map and compass. The path was supposed to curve east, but the terrain around me didn't match the map perfectly. I started to feel a flicker of unease. This was unfamiliar, even for me. I decided to keep going, hoping to find the trail again further down. The underbrush thickened, and my boots caught on low branches. I paused often to listen and look. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the silence felt heavier here, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, I noticed something else. The ground beneath me seemed disturbed. The leaves were crushed in places, as if someone or something had passed recently. The footprints were faint, but they're irregular and not like any animal track I recognized. My heart beat a little faster, but I told myself to stay calm. Maybe another hiker had come this way or a hunter. I pressed on, hoping to see a marker or some sign of a path. The trail was more like a vague corridor through the trees, and the forest closed in tighter, the shadows lengthening even though it wasn't late yet. The sun was getting lower behind the ridges. Then I heard it, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping somewhere nearby. I froze, listening hard. The woods were still again, except for the rustle of leaves stirred by a faint breeze. My mind raced with possible explanations. An animal? Another person? It was impossible to tell. I felt a sudden chill. My stomach tightened. I considered turning back, but the thought of retracing this uncertain path was just as unsettling. I decided to press forward, hoping to reach a wider trail or the river marked on the map. Minutes later, I came to a small clearing. The sunlight filtered in here, casting long shadows. I saw something strange on the ground. A circle of small stones arranged deliberately, surrounding a pile of broken branches and twigs. It looked like someone had made a fire here recently, but there was no ash or soot, only dry wood. This unsettled me more than I expected. Who had been here? Why leave this sign? I stood still for a long moment, scanning the edges of the clearing for movement. There was none. I tried to calm myself. Maybe this was a camping spot someone had used days ago. I looked back to the direction I had come and to the direction ahead. The trail seemed to continue but was thinner, less obvious. I decided to keep going, sticking as close to the map as I could. The light was fading faster now, the forest darker and colder. My pace slowed, legs growing tired, but I pushed on, knowing I needed to get back to the main trail before nightfall. Suddenly, a noise, a low grunt, barely audible, came from somewhere in the thick underbrush to my left. My head snapped that way. Nothing moved. The silence after that was louder than before. I quickened my steps, glancing behind me, feeling like eyes were watching. The sun sank below the horizon, and the sky shifted from blue to gray to a deep navy. I was still in the woods, no sign of the main trail, and my phone showed no signal. Panic began to rise inside me, but I forced myself to breathe deeply, recalling my training and the advice I'd read about staying calm in emergencies. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on, its beam narrow but bright. I scanned the forest around me. Nothing. I tried to remember the direction the trail had taken. East, then south. I took out my compass, confirming I was still heading roughly east. My legs ached, and my pack felt heavier. I hoped the main trail was just beyond the next ridge. After another half hour of trudging uphill, my foot caught on a root, and I stumbled, twisting my ankle sharply. Pain exploded in my foot and lower leg. I fell hard, scraping my hands on rough bark and rocks. My breath came fast and shallow. I sat for a moment, pressing my hand to the twisted ankle. It was swollen and bruised already. I tried to stand, but the pain made me collapse back down. I was alone, injured, and the dark woods closed in like a cage. I pulled out my first aid kit with shaking hands and wrapped my ankle as best I could with the elastic bandage. The pain dulled slightly but did not go away. I knew I couldn't walk far on this. I had to decide: stay put and hope someone found me, or try to limp back the way I came. Neither option felt good. I used my flashlight to look for a place I could rest safely, somewhere sheltered from the wind and protected. Behind a large fallen tree, I found a shallow hollow, covered with dry leaves and pine needles. I settled there, trying to keep warm as the temperature dropped. Night fully fell. The forest was a mix of shadows and vague shapes. Strange sounds filled the air: twigs snapping, distant rustles, and the low cry of an owl. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven. The flashlight battery was running low. I turned it off, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. Sleep was impossible. Every noise made me jump. The ache in my ankle throbbed constantly. I tried to keep calm by thinking through my situation logically. I had enough water for now, a bit of food, and my phone still had battery but no signal. Hours passed, slow and heavy. At some point, I heard something: slow, heavy footsteps crunching leaves nearby. Too heavy for a deer, too slow and deliberate for a small animal. My heart pounded in my chest. I held my breath, listening hard. The footsteps moved past my hiding spot but didn't stop. I had no idea who or what was out there, but I knew one thing: I needed to get out before it got closer again. The first light of dawn was pale and gray when I finally tried to stand. My ankle screamed in protest, but I forced myself to take a few shaky steps. Moving slowly, leaning heavily on a stick I had picked up, I began the long, painful crawl back in the direction I thought was the trailhead. The forest was quieter now, and the rising sun brought some hope. Every step hurt, but I kept moving. After what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of color through the trees. A bright orange trail marker on a tree trunk. Relief flooded me. I was back on the main path. I rested a moment, then continued, limping, moving slowly but I had planned this hike for months. It was supposed to be a straightforward trek through one of the less crowded mountain trails in the region. I was eager to get away from the noise and stress of the city. Nature had always been a place for me to find peace and clarity. The air, the trees, the sound of the wind, it all helped me feel grounded. I thought this trip would be no different. I packed my backpack carefully the night before. Water bottles, a first aid kit, extra layers of clothing, some energy bars, a map, a compass, and my trusted flashlight. I double-checked everything. I didn't want to make a mistake, not this time. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies with a slight breeze, perfect for hiking. I was ready. At dawn, I left my car parked at the trailhead. The early morning sun filtered softly through the canopy of trees, casting long shadows on the dirt path. The smell of pine and wet earth filled the air. The forest was quiet except for the occasional bird call and the crunch of my boots on the dry leaves scattered on the ground. I was on the trail, moving steadily. The path was narrow but well-marked. Every few minutes, I stopped to check the map and compass, making sure I stayed on the right track. The terrain was rugged, with rocks and roots hidden beneath fallen leaves that could easily trip a careless hiker. But I was careful. As the hours passed, the trail climbed steadily. I found myself higher up, with occasional glimpses through the trees of valleys below. The wind was stronger now, cooler and sharper against my skin. I took breaks every hour to drink water and eat a little, sitting on fallen logs or rocks. Around midday, the sun was high and the forest thickened. I noticed the path becoming less clear in some spots. The trail markers, small orange ribbons tied to branches, were more sparse. I realized the area wasn't as well traveled as I thought. My gut told me to stay alert. I kept going. The woods were dense here, older trees with thick trunks and twisted branches. The undergrowth was thick too, with bushes and ferns. I heard the distant sound of running water, maybe a stream or small river. That was good. Water was always important on long hikes. At one point, the trail dipped sharply down into a narrow ravine. The dirt was loose, making it tricky to keep footing. I moved slowly and carefully. At the bottom of the ravine, the sound of water grew louder, and soon I spotted a clear stream flowing over smooth stones. I paused there to refill my water bottle and splash some on my face. The cool water refreshed me. I took out a protein bar, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and sat on a large rock beside the stream. The sun was filtering through the trees here, creating patches of light and shadow on the ground. After resting for a while, I looked at the map. I was supposed to follow the stream for about half a mile before the trail would head back uphill on the other side. I didn't rush. I was in no hurry. But then, as I stood up and started walking alongside the stream, I noticed something odd. The trail seemed to vanish. There were no markers, no clear path, just the thick underbrush and the stream. I stopped and scanned the area carefully, trying to find any sign of the trail. I saw nothing. My heart started beating a little faster. I thought maybe I had missed a turn somewhere. I checked the compass. The map said I should be heading roughly northeast. The stream flowed from the southeast to the northwest, so I tried to follow it upstream, thinking the trail might be close by. The ground here was uneven, slippery with moss and wet leaves. I moved cautiously, careful not to lose my footing and fall into the water. The trees closed in tighter. The light dimmed under the thick canopy. After walking for about 10 minutes, I stopped again. I tried to see if there was a path, but the forest floor was dense with small plants and fallen branches. I realized I might have gone off the trail entirely. A cold feeling of unease settled in my chest. Not panic, but the realization that I was no longer on a marked trail. I pulled out my compass again. The map showed the trail curving away from the stream in this area. I was supposed to turn left and go uphill, but I couldn't see any clear path. I tried to retrace my steps, moving back toward where I thought the trail had been. But the thick forest made it hard to keep a clear sense of direction. Every tree looked the same. The sound of the stream was fading behind me, swallowed by the forest. I stopped again, breathing deeply. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but no signal. That was expected. This was a remote area. I reminded myself to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. I took out my whistle and gave 3 loud blasts. Maybe other hikers were nearby. No response, just the echo bouncing off the trees. I waited a few minutes and tried again. Nothing. I considered my options. I could try to climb uphill, hoping to find the trail or at least higher ground where I might get a signal or see some landmark. Or I could stay put, hoping someone would find me. I decided to climb. I found a rough slope, covered with roots and rocks. It was steep and tiring, but I took it slow. My hands and feet gripped the soil and tree trunks as I climbed. Sweat dripped down my face. The forest grew even darker, the trees taller, blocking most of the sunlight. After about 20 minutes of climbing, I reached a small clearing on a rocky outcrop. From here, I could see a bit further. The forest stretched in all directions. I spotted the valley far below, with a ribbon of road cutting through it. I sat down, exhausted but relieved to have found a vantage point. I drank some water and ate another energy bar. I thought about how far I might be from the trailhead or my car. Suddenly, I noticed something else. The sky had darkened. Thick gray clouds were moving in fast. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees. The weather was changing rapidly. I knew that storms in the mountains could be dangerous. Rain would make the ground slippery and visibility poor. I needed to find shelter or get back down before it started. I decided to descend the slope carefully, keeping my eyes open for any sign of the trail. I moved slowly, placing each foot carefully. The wind bent the branches and scattered dry leaves across the ground. As I moved down, the first drops of rain fell. They were light at first, but soon became heavier. The smell of wet earth rose around me. My jacket got damp, and the rocks became slick. I pushed forward, trying to find the trail. Then, a sudden loud crack sounded behind me. I froze. It was the sound of a large branch snapping under pressure. The trees creaked in the wind. I looked around, but saw nothing unusual, just the storm gathering strength. I kept moving, but the rain was now a steady downpour. My vision blurred. The ground became muddy, making every step harder. Suddenly, my foot slipped on a wet root, and I fell forward, scraping my hands and knees on the rough soil. Pain shot through my right knee. I tried to stand, but the pain was sharp. I sat for a moment, breathing hard. I could see some blood on my pants. The rain washed it away slowly, but the knee was swollen and stiff. I had to keep going. The storm was getting worse. I pulled out my first aid kit, cleaned the wounds as best I could, and wrapped the knee with an elastic bandage. I tested my weight carefully. The pain was there but bearable. I forced myself up and continued down the slope, gripping tree trunks for balance. Then, a loud roar echoed through the forest. It was not thunder. It was a deep, guttural sound, low and frightening. My heart jumped. I stopped and listened. The sound came again, closer this time. I looked around nervously. The forest was dense, the rain beating down on leaves and branches. The wind howled. Then I saw it, a large animal moving between the trees. A bear. It was a massive black bear, lumbering through the underbrush. It hadn't seen me yet, but I was terrified. I remembered everything I'd read about bear encounters. Don't run, stay calm, make yourself look big. But my injured knee made movement difficult. I stood frozen. The bear stopped, sniffing the air. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. The bear moved slowly toward me. The roar came again, louder. I grabbed a thick stick from the ground, raising it slowly. The bear came closer, and I could see the wetness of its nose, the sharpness of its claws. I backed away slowly, step by step. Suddenly, the bear charged. I barely had time to raise the stick, but it was no use. The bear knocked me to the ground. Pain exploded in my shoulder. I rolled over, covering my head. The attack was brief but violent. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the bear retreated into the trees. I lay there shaking, bleeding, and in shock. I knew I had to get help fast. Using the last of my strength, I crawled toward the direction I remembered seeing the road. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. I moved painfully and slowly, each movement sending sharp pain through my body. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the outline. I never thought something as simple as taking a few extra steps down the wrong trail could throw my whole life into danger. I had been hiking for years, sometimes with friends, but mostly alone, especially over the last few years. I liked the silence, the fresh air, and the slow, steady feeling of being completely disconnected from everything else. The quiet made it easier to think, and the forest had always made me feel safer than the cities ever did. It was early October when I decided to take a long weekend to clear my head. I had been working too much. Most days were spent staring at a screen for 9 or 10 hours straight, only breaking to eat something fast or scroll through more screens. I didn't like the way things were going, the way I felt tired all the time, the way I couldn't sleep properly anymore. I had been dreaming of trees and cold creeks and sharp ridgelines. I finally packed my bag, tossed it in the back of my car, and drove out to the trailhead at Dead Elk Ridge. Despite the name, it wasn't known for anything dark. The ridge got its name after some hunters found a bull elk dead on the slope years back. There weren't many predators in the area anymore, so it became a joke of a name. No one took it seriously. The trail ran about 18 miles through forest and some exposed ridge, with some small paths branching off if you wanted to extend the hike. My plan was to camp about 9 miles in, spend the night near the ridge, and hike back the next day. I left the trailhead around 9 in the morning. The sun was still low behind the trees, and the cold air made steam rise off the damp ground. Everything smelled like pine needles and wet bark. The weight of the pack felt good on my back. I moved steadily uphill for the first few hours, taking my time. The forest was quiet, just the occasional chirp of a bird, the creak of a tree, the rustle of squirrels, or something small moving through dead leaves. I didn't see anyone else out there that day. By noon, I had covered a little over 6 miles. I stopped at a small overlook to eat a sandwich and drink some water. The view was sharp, hundreds of tree-covered ridges rolling out into the distance, all painted with orange and red leaves. The wind picked up a little, and the air smelled sharper than before, like snow might not be too far off. I checked my map, even though I had walked this trail before. Everything looked the same. There was a fork about a mile ahead. If I stayed left, I'd head toward the ridge. If I took the right branch, I'd hit an older trail that circled deeper through the woods and eventually reconnected. I had never taken that one. It looked rougher on the map, and not many people talked about it. I packed up and got moving again. About 20 minutes later, I reached the fork. The signpost had faded. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. One arm pointed to Ridge Trail, and the other to Lower Loop. The arrow for Lower Loop was partly broken and leaned at a weird angle. I paused there for a second, then stepped left and kept going toward the ridge. I don't know why I stopped again, only 20 feet past it. Maybe I felt a breeze from the other direction, or maybe I just wanted to see something new. I looked back at the broken sign and then at the rough path cutting away through the trees. I told myself I had time. The weather was clear. I had all my gear. I wasn't in a rush. So I turned around and headed down the lower loop. The trail narrowed fast. It was only wide enough for one person. Branches scraped at my jacket, and in some spots I had to duck under low-hanging limbs. The sun barely made it through the thick trees. It felt like walking through a green tunnel. The slope turned down sharply, and I had to watch my step to avoid slipping on loose dirt and wet leaves. I kept expecting the trail to open up again, but it never did. After about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen a single trail marker. No faded paint, no carved tree, no stone cairn. I checked my map again. The line for the lower loop was thin and faint, like it had been added long ago and never updated. I zoomed in on my phone's GPS, but I had already lost signal. The blue dot just floated somewhere above the blank map. I was still heading roughly southwest, which meant I'd eventually curve back toward the main trail. I figured I'd keep going for a bit longer. The sun was still up, and I had plenty of time before dark. But the path kept sloping down farther and farther, winding through tight trees and thicker underbrush. Eventually, the trail just faded out altogether. 1 minute, there was a faint line in the dirt. The next minute, it was gone. The trees closed in so tight that I couldn't tell where I had just come from. I stopped and turned in a slow circle, listening, but the woods were too quiet. That was when I felt the first edge of real worry. I pulled out the map again, but there was no clear answer. I hadn't marked any waypoints. I could have turned back, but without a visible trail, I'd have to guess my way through a mess of trees and ridges. The sun was getting lower. The smart move would have been to stop right there and start backtracking carefully. But instead, I kept going downhill. I told myself I'd hit a creek or a road, or maybe the trail would pick back up. About 20 minutes later, I slipped and went down hard. My foot hit a patch of loose rocks, and I landed on my side against a fallen log. My right leg twisted awkwardly. I sat there for a second, stunned. Then I felt the pain start to spread down from my knee. I rolled up my pant leg. It was already swelling a little. Not broken, but maybe sprained. I could still walk, but the pain sharpened with every step. The sun finally dipped behind the ridge. I knew I had maybe an hour of usable light left, and that was being generous. I stopped, looked around, and started setting up camp where I was. I cleared a small space under some pines, spread out my ground sheet and sleeping bag, and put on my jacket. The cold came fast. I didn't want to risk starting a fire in a dense patch like that. So I ate a granola bar and drank some water, then wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and tried to get some sleep. It didn't happen. Every sound in the woods was louder at night. Branches creaked overhead. I heard something moving through leaves nearby, slow, steady steps that would stop for long stretches before starting again. Could have been a deer, or a bear, or something else. I kept my knife close and stayed completely still. By morning, my leg was worse. The swelling had spread down into my ankle. I could walk, but not fast. I packed up and started moving uphill, trying to guess my way back toward where the trail had disappeared. I checked the sun's position, tried to keep going northeast, but nothing looked familiar. Every hill and tree started blending together. I walked for maybe 2 hours before realizing I had somehow looped back downhill again. I found a small creek and followed it, hoping it would lead me to a larger stream or even a forest road. But the farther I followed it, the rougher the terrain became. Eventually, the creek dropped into a narrow gorge, and I had to climb down a steep rocky slope to keep going. I slipped again, this time landing on my hip. My water bottle flew out of my side pocket and rolled down into the rocks. I couldn't find it. I sat there for a long time after that, just breathing hard, trying not to panic. I had enough food for another day, maybe 2 if I stretched it, but I was already out of water. I refilled my backup bottle from the creek and used iodine tablets, but the water still tasted like dirt and rust. I knew I couldn't keep moving downhill forever. At some point, I had to turn around, but everything behind me was now unfamiliar. That night, I didn't even unroll my sleeping bag. I just sat with my back against a tree, listening to the sounds again. I didn't see anything, but I kept feeling like something was watching me. The kind of feeling you get when you're being followed, only I couldn't prove it. Maybe it was my own stress playing tricks, but I kept hearing sticks snapping in the dark. On the 3rd day, I saw a boot print in the mud. It was old, dry around the edges, probably a few days ahead of me, but it was the first human sign I'd seen since leaving the fork. I followed the direction it was pointed, moving as fast as my leg would let me. I passed more boot prints, this time fresher. Then I saw something that made my stomach twist. There was a shredded tarp caught in some bushes, torn clean through the center. One corner was stained dark brown, and there were claw marks on the tree next to it, deep ones, for long slashes spaced wide. Bears? Maybe, but I hadn't seen any fresh scat or tracks. Whatever it was, someone else had camped here and left in a hurry. I kept moving. Around mid-afternoon, I found a man's backpack half buried under leaves. The fabric had been ripped apart, zippers broken. The main compartment was empty. I didn't find any ID or anything helpful, just the frame and some straps. I left it and pushed on. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed into a place where I wasn't supposed to be. By the time I saw the shack, I had been walking for 6 hours straight. My body hurt everywhere. The structure was barely standing. Just a square of wood with a metal roof and a door hanging loose from one hinge. It looked abandoned. I hesitated before walking up to it. One window had been shattered, and the glass was scattered in the dirt. Inside, it smelled like mildew and rot. There was nothing useful, just an old cot, a broken lantern, and an empty can of beans rusted through at the bottom. I had been planning the trip for months. It was something I had wanted to do for years, but always pushed off for one reason or another: work, money, life. There was a part of Arizona I'd always wanted to hike through, a remote stretch of desert between two small mountain ranges. It was a mix of rocky terrain, canyons, and open desert flats. Not a touristy place. No big national park signs, no paved paths, no guides. Just wild land. It was late March, so the temperatures were mild, at least by desert standards. The days were warm and dry, the nights cooler but not freezing. That window of time before the summer heat kicked in, but after the cold winter months, was perfect. I had taken a week off work, and I planned to spend 4 of those days hiking and camping through a loop trail I mapped out myself. It wasn't a marked trail. It was just something I traced from satellite maps, topographic charts, and a few blog posts from other hikers who had been through the area. I drove my old SUV down a dirt road for over an hour after leaving the nearest paved highway. The road got worse and worse the deeper I went. The bouncing was bad, and at some points I thought I'd ruin the undercarriage. But I made it to the spot I had marked as my starting point, a dry wash near a crumbling cattle fence. I parked in the shade of a small cliff, got my gear from the back, double-checked everything, locked the car, and set out on foot. I had everything I needed: 2 large water bladders, a small water filter, basic medical supplies, sunblock, high-calorie food, a satellite GPS unit with a distress button, and an old paper map as backup. I kept the GPS unit clipped to my shoulder strap. I had triple-checked the coordinates before leaving and left them with my brother. If anything went wrong, he'd know where I was supposed to be. The first day went smoothly. I hiked along the bottom of the dry wash for hours. The sun beat down, and the heat reflected off the pale rocks. I stopped often to rest in what little shade I could find. The silence was deep, not total silence. There were birds, insects, the crunch of gravel under my boots, but there was no human noise. That kind of silence is different. It settles into your mind. You start hearing things you don't normally hear: your own breath, the small creaks of your gear shifting on your shoulders, the blood in your ears. By late afternoon, I had made it to a narrow slot canyon I had planned to pass through. The walls rose up on both sides, red and tan and streaked with black. I followed the canyon until I reached a wider flat area and set up camp. I boiled some water, rehydrated a meal, and sat on a rock to eat. The light faded from orange to purple. Coyotes howled in the distance. I was tired but content. I rolled out my sleeping pad under a rock overhang. I didn't bring a tent, just a lightweight bivy sack, the kind you zip up around your sleeping bag. I lay there looking at the stars. They were bright and sharp.
No clouds.
I fell asleep easily. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a jolt. Not from a noise exactly, but from a feeling. You know that sense that something is off, even if you can't name it right away? It was pitch black, and the air felt colder than it should have. I stayed still and listened. There was a breeze, soft and dry. A few pebbles shifted somewhere nearby, like they had been kicked loose. I told myself it was just some animal, maybe a rabbit or a fox. I closed my eyes again and tried to sleep, but I didn't sleep well after that. In the morning, I noticed something strange. About 20 feet from where I had slept, there were fresh tracks in the soft sand. Not animal tracks, boots. At least one person had walked through the area during the night. The prints came from the direction I had come from and continued up the canyon. I stared at them for a long time. They weren't mine. I had stayed in my bag all night, and I knew exactly where I had walked the day before. These were new, and they passed right by where I had been sleeping. I stood there for a while, trying to process it. I hadn't seen or heard another person since I left my car. No vehicles, no voices, nothing. There were no trailheads nearby, and this area wasn't exactly popular. I had done my research. It was remote, hard to get to, and yet, someone had walked right through my camp at night. It didn't make sense, but I didn't want to overthink it. People pass through remote places sometimes. Maybe another hiker was out there. Maybe they didn't see me. Maybe they didn't care. I kept going. Day 2 took me through rougher terrain. The canyon narrowed, twisted, and climbed up into a series of ridges. I had to scramble over large rocks, find handholds, and watch my step. I stopped to filter water from a shallow pool I found in a shaded crack between 2 boulders. The water was stale but better than nothing. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed something again that made me uneasy. Another boot print. This one fresher. The tread pattern was the same as the ones from the night before. A bit smaller than mine. Maybe a size 9 or 10. Definitely not mine. I checked my GPS. I wasn't on a trail. I was following a random, rugged path through rock and brush. There was no logical reason someone else would be on the exact same path unless they had followed me. My stomach twisted. I looked around slowly, scanning the horizon and the ridges above. Nothing moved. No sound. Just the wind. I didn't see anyone. I walked faster after that. I kept checking behind me. Every shadow started to feel wrong. I didn't stop for long breaks. I just wanted to reach the next planned stop before sunset. That night, I camped in a small cave-like recess under a stone ledge. I didn't make a fire. I didn't cook. I just ate a dry protein bar and drank water. I tucked myself in deeper than the night before and kept my GPS beacon clipped to my chest, just in case. I slept lightly, waking at every small sound. At dawn, I climbed out and scanned the ground again. I didn't see any new prints, but that didn't make me feel better. Maybe they were being more careful now. On the 3rd day, things got worse. I was deep into the loop now. No turning back. I had crossed the point where it was shorter to finish the route than to return the way I came. The landscape grew harsher. Less shade, more jagged rocks, dry and cracked earth. Every few hours, I checked the GPS coordinates. I was still on track. Around noon, I crested a ridge and stopped to rest. From that height, I could see miles of desert stretching out in all directions. It looked empty, but off to the south, near the base of a slope, I saw something move. A flicker of motion. It was too far to make out details, but it looked like someone standing still, then moving behind a large rock. I crouched low. I stayed there, waiting, watching. Nothing else moved. I waited at least 20 minutes before continuing, and even then, I moved slowly, carefully. Every so often, I looked behind me. 2 hours later, I reached a dry stream bed and followed it toward a small canyon. It was narrow with steep sides, the kind of place where echoes carry. I started hearing faint noises. Not voices, just sounds. Rocks tapping, footsteps maybe, scuffing gravel. I stopped and listened again, but the sounds would always stop when I did. Later that afternoon, I found something that made everything worse. I was climbing through a narrow gap when I saw something stuffed into a crack in the wall. A torn piece of cloth, faded blue, like denim. A corner of it was wedged into the rock, the rest fluttering slightly in the breeze. It looked recent. No dust, no sun bleaching. I kept moving. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even get into the bivvy. I just sat under a ledge with my back against the rock, gripping the small camping knife I kept in my bag. Every few minutes, I would look around with my flashlight. I thought I saw shapes, movement, but nothing clear. Before the sun rose, I packed everything and started hiking again. My body was tired, but my brain was on full alert. I didn't stop to eat, just kept going, putting distance between me and whatever was behind me. By the last day, I had less than 6 miles to go. I would loop back around to my car. I just had to make it. The terrain leveled out into wide flats of cracked desert crust. No cover.
No sabe.
I could see everything around me. Then I saw it again, another figure, this time much closer. About 100 yards behind me, walking slowly. Not rushing, just matching my pace. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't armed. I had no cell signal. If I ran, I'd burn out in the heat. If I stopped, I didn't know what they'd do. I picked up my pace anyway, pushed myself hard, even when my legs ached. I stopped looking back. I just moved. Took hours, but eventually I saw the cliff where I had parked. My car was still there, shimmering in the heat. I almost cried when I saw it. I ran the last half mile. When I reached the SUV, I threw my pack into the back and jumped into the driver's seat. I locked the doors, started the engine, and backed out fast. I didn't look behind me until I was on the main dirt road. Then I stopped, got out, and scanned the distance with binoculars. I don't usually write about the trips I take, but this one has been stuck in my head for months. I need to write it all down because I keep replaying every single part in my mind, over and over, like a loop. It was supposed to be a solo hiking trip through a long trail that cut through the backcountry of a mountain range I'd been reading about for a while. No big crowds.
No bici campsites.
Just forest, ridges, river valleys, switchbacks, and long stretches of trail barely used by people. That was the appeal. It sounded like the perfect escape from everything in my life. My job, the traffic, the phone, the pressure. I didn't want silence. I wanted something harder to explain. I wanted space, stillness, some kind of test. I packed for a 6-day hike through the Bitterroot Mountains in western Montana. I planned it out weeks ahead. I studied maps. I marked out water sources. I packed light, but I didn't cut corners. My gear was dialed in. I had my tent, sleeping pad, bag rated down to 20 degrees, a lightweight canister stove, freeze-dried food, snacks, emergency beacon, 2 large water bottles, purification tablets, GPS with spare batteries, a knife, headlamp, extra socks, compact med kit, bear spray, and a physical map tucked in a waterproof pouch. I was used to being out alone. I wasn't worried. I drove up from Missoula and parked near the trailhead at the base of a forest road. It wasn't a marked lot, just a pull-off with enough room for a few vehicles. There were no cars there when I arrived. I stepped out, stretched, locked up, threw on my pack, and started walking by mid-morning. The trail was narrow and lightly maintained, just how I'd hoped. Trees leaned in close, and I could smell the pine resin and old earth. The elevation climbed gradually at first, just a slow rise under a dense green canopy. After a couple miles, I crossed a dry creek bed and spotted elk prints in the sand. Further up, the air cooled and the trail turned rocky. I followed it through thick stands of fir and larch, crossed over a couple downed trees, then walked for nearly 5 hours before making camp for the first night. I set up near a flat spot between 2 trees where I could hang my food. There was a small clearing, just enough to stretch out and sit against a log to cook. I boiled water and ate a bag of chili mac, then sat in the dirt and watched the light fade from the treetops. The sky turned orange, then purple. It was the kind of peace I'd come out here for. That first night passed quietly. I didn't sleep perfectly. I rarely do on the first night out, but I got enough rest. It was cold when I got up, probably in the 40s, so I heated water for instant coffee and oatmeal. I felt strong. I packed up, hoisted my bag, and headed deeper into the mountains. By noon, I was past the halfway point of that day's route. I'd stopped to filter water near a stream when I noticed what looked like a shredded tarp off the trail about 20 yards into the woods. I thought maybe it had blown away from someone's campsite. I figured it might be trash left by hunters or hikers, so I stepped off trail to take a look. But when I got closer, I realized it wasn't a tarp. It was a jacket, torn up, dirty, sun-faded. Maybe camo once, but hard to tell. It looked like it had been lying out there for a long time. I poked at it with a stick and saw the back was torn open like it had been ripped, not just from age. Near it was a backpack with one strap half buried in moss and dirt. The fabric had rotted through, and something sharp had clearly cut through one side. I didn't touch it again. I stood still for a long time just staring at it. Something about it gave me a weird feeling I couldn't explain. I'm not squeamish and I'm not paranoid, but this wasn't just lost gear. It looked wrong. I couldn't say exactly why, but I didn't want to be around it. I walked back to the trail, told myself to keep moving. It was probably nothing. Old gear, Storm damage. An animal got into it. But I checked my map and saw I was still 3 days out from the nearest Forest Service road that might lead to a ranger station. There was no one out here to report it to even if I wanted to. I kept going. That night, I camped near a small alpine lake tucked in between two ridges. It was quiet, completely still, no wind at all. I made camp, hung my food, and ate in silence while the sun set behind the trees. I tried not to think about the gear I'd found, but something about it kept pulling at my thoughts. I lay awake longer than usual, listening. I didn't hear anything strange. No branches cracking, no distant animal sounds, just the wind moving through the pines and the occasional ripple of the lake. Still, I didn't sleep well. Something felt off. The next day, I hiked over the ridge and dropped into a long, narrow valley. The trail became hard to follow in places. I had to stop a few times to check my position on the GPS and realign with the map. Around late afternoon, I came across boot prints in the dirt. Fresh ones. That shouldn't have been strange, but they weren't there the day before. I checked closely. Same size as mine, maybe a little bigger. Deep enough to mean someone passed through recently. I followed the prints for a while, trying to tell if they were going my direction or the opposite, but the soil was dry and it was hard to tell. I kept seeing them every few minutes along the trail. Then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. There were no return prints, just one set, like someone had walked this stretch recently, but hadn't come back. And it didn't look like anyone had passed me. I hadn't seen a single soul since I left the car. No other packs, no tents, no voices, no smoke from fires in the distance. Nothing. Later, as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, I stopped to set up camp at the base of a rocky slope. I was surrounded by trees on all sides. It was the kind of place that felt hidden, almost too hidden. I cooked fast, hung the bear bag, and crawled into the tent before it got fully dark. I was tired but alert, like my body wouldn't fully let go. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving. Not close, but not far. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag and listened. It was slow, steady, crunching over leaves and sticks. Could have been a deer or a bear, but then it stopped, and I heard nothing, not even breathing, no movement, just stillness again. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of my tent, gripping my knife with one hand, bear spray within reach. The next morning, I stepped out of the tent and found the cord from my bear bag had been cut. Not chewed, cut clean through. The food bag itself was gone, completely. No scattered remains, no claw marks, no shredded packaging. Just gone. That's when the fear hit me for real. Not the jumpy kind, the deep kind. The kind that settles in your stomach and makes everything quiet. I didn't eat that morning. I packed up and started walking fast, faster than I usually hike. I kept checking behind me, scanning the trees, listening. That day the trail ran along a ridge with steep drop-offs on one side and thick timber on the other. I kept catching shadows between the trees. Every time I stopped to look, nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Not followed exactly, but observed. Like whatever was out there didn't want to get close yet. Like it was waiting. Mid-afternoon, I came around a bend in the trail and saw something hanging from a low branch ahead. I froze. It was my food bag, tied up with a new cord. Clean, untorn, hanging at eye level like someone had placed it there on purpose. I didn't touch it. I turned around and walked. Fast. I pulled out my GPS and tried to find the quickest way to the nearest road. There was a Forest Service trail that cut down the mountain into a wider fire road, but it would take until nightfall to reach. I didn't care. I just walked. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something behind me. Not footsteps, just movement, but always far enough to stay hidden. I kept moving, heart pounding, every muscle tight. My legs were cramping by the time I reached the lower section of the mountain. Just before nightfall, I spotted something up ahead. An old wooden trail sign, half rotted and tilted. Below it, a narrow dirt road. I made my way down to it, found a flat patch, and made a quick decision.
No tent.
Just a sleeping bag on the ground. I didn't eat. I didn't build a fire. I lay there fully dressed, knife in hand, staring up through the trees until I passed out from exhaustion. When I woke up, it was barely light. I stood, sore and shaking, and followed the road east. I walked for 5 hours until I reached a gated access point with a gravel lot. My legs felt like wood, and my shoulders ached from the pack. But I kept walking until I found a highway. A passing truck stopped. The man inside looked surprised to see me. I must have looked like hell. I didn't tell him everything, just that I'd lost the trail, that I'd cut the trip short, that I was okay now. He nodded and drove me into town. I used a payphone at a gas station to call a friend from Missoula, and he came to get me. Weeks passed before I could think clearly about what happened. I kept telling myself maybe I imagined some of it, but deep down I know I didn't. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. I don't really remember when it started, the habit of hiking alone. Maybe it was after my friends started canceling plans more often. Everyone seemed too busy, too tired, too wrapped up in family or work. I didn't have any of that, not at the time, and I was sick of waiting for company. So one day I just packed a bag, drove out toward the mountains and started walking. After a while, it became normal. It gave me peace. That's what I told myself anyway. I live in western Montana, in a quiet town surrounded by endless wilderness. There's no shortage of places to hike. I'd been on more than 100 trails by the time I turned 32. Most of them were well-marked and had enough foot traffic that I rarely felt isolated. But every once in a while, I'd push out a little farther. That's where I found real solitude. That September, I decided to spend the weekend hiking a section of the Kootenai National Forest I'd never touched before. It wasn't a marked trail in the traditional sense. I found it by accident, really, while scanning satellite maps online. I saw a faded line of clearing that stretched through dense tree cover, barely visible but definitely there. When I looked it up in old trail databases, I found a name, Mile 46 Spur, but no recent entries, no trip reports, nothing in the past 5 or 6 years. That should have told me something, but I thought maybe it was just a forgotten trail. I thought I'd rediscover it. I left early Friday morning. The drive out took longer than expected, almost 4 hours of winding roads, half of them gravel. When I finally got to the trailhead, it was just a rusted post leaning sideways with a cracked, blank sign nailed to it. No maps, no parking area, just a dead-end dirt road with trees pressing in from all sides. I checked my pack twice before stepping out. I had 2 days of food, a 3-liter hydration bladder, a water filter, a first aid kit, bear spray, a GPS unit with a full charge, and my paper maps. I also had my phone, though I didn't expect a signal out there. I left a note on my dash with the trail name, date, and estimated return time. I always did that, even when I didn't think anyone would care. The weather was perfect, clear skies, about 68 degrees, just the right breeze to keep bugs away. The trail, if you could call it that, started as a gentle incline through old-growth pine. There was a narrow path underfoot, soft with needles, barely wide enough for one person. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. Fallen branches crossed it here and there. Some parts dipped into little gullies that were soft with moss and shaded like twilight. By the time I was 2 miles in, I stopped hearing anything man-made. No cars, no planes overhead, not even the faint echo of ATVs. Just wind and birds and the creak of trees shifting in the sun. It was what I wanted, total quiet. But the deeper I went, the more I noticed something. The forest here felt different. Not supernatural or anything. Just older, wilder, like nothing had been touched in a long time. I saw no trash, no signs of other hikers, no blazes on trees or stacked cairns. Even the animals seemed scarce. I'd usually see chipmunks or hear squirrels. Here it was just the occasional crow or a single hawk wheeling overhead. The stillness made it easy to lose track of time. I check my GPS every so often and mark waypoints, but otherwise I just kept walking. By late afternoon, I reached a flat stretch that opened into a meadow. There was a small creek running through it, shallow and clear. I decided to camp there for the night. I pitched my small one-person tent about 20 yards from the water and cooked a freeze-dried meal on my little stove. As the sun dropped, the sky turned that pale purple you only get in the mountains, and everything around me fell into a strange quiet again. I kept listening for insects or frogs or even a distant coyote, but nothing came, just wind rustling through the grass. That night, I couldn't sleep well. I woke up several times to nothing. No sounds, no motion, just this nagging feeling in my chest. Not fear exactly, but unease. I kept thinking about how far I was from help. If I twisted an ankle, if a branch fell on me, if a bear got too close, there was no one to yell to, no one to hear me. I woke early the next morning, before the sun broke over the trees. My legs were a little stiff but otherwise fine. I packed up quickly, filtered some water, and kept moving. According to the map I'd drawn from satellite images, there was a switchback ahead that led up a ridge and dropped into a narrow valley. That's where I was heading. It was supposed to have a small pond and a series of rock outcrops with great views. As I climbed the ridge, the trail all but disappeared. I had to bushwhack through thick undergrowth, pushing aside ferns and ducking under branches. The grade was steep and uneven, and the higher I got, the more I noticed how dry everything became. The trees were thinner here, and many of them looked dead or dying. The ground was cracked in places, and I started seeing bones. Animal bones. Not just one or two, but scattered pieces, ribs, jaws, femurs, all picked clean. At first, I thought maybe a mountain lion had a den nearby, but there were too many for that. Too many different kinds, deer, rabbits, even a coyote skull. I kept telling myself it was natural, just part of the cycle, but it didn't feel right. I started moving faster without realizing it. When I reached the top of the ridge, I expected a view. What I got was a wall of gray sky and a sharp wind that nearly knocked me sideways. The clouds had rolled in from the west, thick and low, turning everything a dull, washed-out color. I could see the pond below, small and still, but it didn't look peaceful. It looked like something hiding. I hesitated. Every part of me said to turn around, but I didn't. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just creeped out because I was alone. I started the descent. That's when things got worse. The trail on the other side was washed out. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, and a few times I slipped and had to catch myself on branches or roots. One wrong step and I would have tumbled. It took nearly an hour to get down, and when I did, I was scraped, sweaty, and more tired than I should have been. I reached the edge of the pond and sat on a flat stone. The water was still, too still, like glass. No fish,
No bugs.
no movement, just silence. I ate a protein bar, sipped water, and checked my GPS again. That's when I noticed it. The screen showed me a location that didn't make sense. According to the satellite, I was 2 miles northeast of where I should have been. That wasn't possible. I'd been following the ridgeline exactly. I'd marked every waypoint, but my track didn't match my map. Not even close. I thought maybe the signal was bad. I reset the unit, waited, still the same. I looked around and realized I didn't recognize anything. Not the pond, not the slope, not the angle of the trees. Somehow I'd veered way off course. I tried not to panic. I had gear, I had supplies, I had light left. I decided to backtrack the way I came, up the ridge. But as I started climbing, the sky darkened again. The clouds sank lower, and within minutes a fine mist was falling. Then it turned to rain. Not a heavy downpour, but steady enough to soak everything. The rocks became slick. My footing grew unsure. I pushed through for an hour, then 2. I couldn't find the top. The ridge kept climbing, but it didn't look familiar anymore. I stopped and turned in place, staring down at the valley below. The pond was gone. I didn't know if it was hidden by trees or if I had veered off again, but it wasn't where I expected. I started marking trees with my knife, deep slashes at eye level so I wouldn't circle back by accident. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. One of the trees already had a mark. Not mine, not fresh, a long, deep cut, weathered and old. I looked closer. The tree beside it had the same. Then another. I wasn't the first person to get lost here. That night, I didn't set up my tent. I just found a patch of flat ground, pulled on my rain gear, and wrapped myself in a tarp under a low pine. I didn't sleep. Not really. The wind howled through the trees, and every so often I thought I heard footsteps. But there was never anything there. When daylight finally came, I checked my GPS again. The battery was down to 15%. The screen blinked and flickered. I turned it off to save power. I knew I had to find a way out. Anyway, I made a decision to drop elevation. I remembered reading that following water downhill would eventually lead to something. Maybe a road, maybe a campsite, anything. So I started looking for streams. By noon, I found a narrow runoff channel. It wasn't much, just a trickle over stones. But it was enough. I followed it. The forest thickened again. The trees here were huge, bigger than anything I'd seen so far, and spaced wide apart, as if nothing grew between them. The light barely touched the ground. That's when I saw the remains. Not bones, not animals. The tent, collapsed, torn, covered in mold, half buried under leaves. I walked to it slowly.